The Moorchild by Eloise McGraw. Okay, so there are 5 parts. To all children who have ever felt different. Changeling. An ugly, stupid, or strange child superstitiously believed to have been left by fairies in place of a pretty, charming child. Random House Dictionary, unabridged edition. The fairies' normal method was to steal an unchristened child who had not been given proper protection out of the cradle, and to leave a substitute in its place. The true changelings are those fairy creatures who replace the stolen babies. The Encyclopedia of Fairies by Catherine Briggs. Part 1. 1. It was old Bess, the wise woman of the village, who first suspected that the baby at her daughter's house was a changeling. For a time she held her pace. Many babies were ill-favored, she told herself. Many babies cried with what seemed fury against the world, though this little Saskia had not done so as a newborn. It even seemed to old Bess that the child had not looked quite like this for the first few months, but somehow she could never quite remember. Likely the babe had just a worse than usual colic. No doubt her skin, dark as a gypsy tinker's so far, would lighten so as to look more fitting with that fluff of pale hair, or the hair might darken. It was even possible that the strange, shifting color of her eyes would settle down in good time. The parrots both had blue eyes, and Wara's sky blue like old Bess's own. Big Yano the blacksmith's a deeper shade. The child's were cloud gray or moss green, even a startling lilac, never blue. They were oddly shaped eyes, set at a slant, wide and shiny, with scarcely a glimpse of white around the iris. Old Bess, strongly reminded of the eyes of squirrels, shook off the thought. Plenty of babies looked like their great aunts or their third cousins or some forebear nobody remembered, she told herself, and kept her lips closed and her face shut to the rest of the village, and her fears to herself. She was by nature a close-tongued woman, solitary in her ways, who kept her own counsel unless it was asked for, sometimes even then. Queerer still to the minds of villagers, she chose not to live with her daughter of kin like other widow women, but all by herself in the little hut where the old monk died, at the far edge of the scatter of houses where the street dwindled into a patch over the moor. A mighty odd one, the others thought her. Contrarious, some even said behind their hands. Witch. But she knew all about herbs and how to cure anything from a sore throat to a broken bone, so they put up with her. Old Bess did not care to set them wondering and gossiping about her suspicious of little Saskia. Indeed, she wanted fiercely to be wrong. But she had never before seen a pair of eyes that seldom seemed the same color twice. And Wara would admit no flaw in her precious infant. 7 years of marriage had brought her and Yano only stillbirths. Now at last she had a child alive and healthy, like the other village wives, and would no longer feel an outsider. Or worst of all, be classed with Helsa, who is barren. Helsa, wife of a loon, the only man in the village to own 3 cows, was not only childless but past the age of childbearing, Everyone pitied her, but it was hard to like her. Her tongue was always wagging about one or another of her neighbors. Anwara doted on the baby, and until the onset of the child's strange, persistent tantrums, had bloomed with joy. By now the bloom had faded, but still she glared down anyone who gave her Saskia a puzzled look. She comforted and rocked. She patiently bore the screaming, though she grew thin and short-tempered as the weeks passed, and little Saskia grew stronger and more active and even harder to control. Yana was not so patient. "Can't you keep the babe from squalling, wife? What ails it, screaming like a bogler fluke?" "She's got the colic is all. Sit you down and eat your dinner and leave Saskia to them that knows more about it." "I know that's never colic. Not to go on this long. My brother's first one had colic, but it came and went, like, and the babe got over it by and by." "So will Saskia get over it, won't you, little one? Mamma's sweetling, mamma's poppet?" "Shh, shh." Bending over the basket bed, Anwara narrowly escaped a clout from a flailing small fist. The racket grew louder, if anything. Yano watched and shook his head. "She'll be out of that truckle bed soon, and strong as my old ram. Look at her kick there, will you? Leave off staring at her, it frets her." "It's me that frets her," Yano muttered, continuing to stare through narrowed eyes at his raging offspring, who glared straight back at him. Slowly he backed away. The child's screams abated slightly. "You see that?" he shouted. "It's me she can't abide. Her own da. Oh, sit you down and eat, husband. I tell you it's colic. Then dose her with valerian or some such. But shut her up." Amara had tried valerian yesterday. Near of tears she made a tea of St. John's wort, only to have it knocked out of the spoon and into her face while Saskia shrieked and kicked with redoubled fury. At her wits' end, Anwara tried a spoonful of honey, though it was said to be bad for little ones. At once silence settled like balm over the little house, and after a few minutes Saskia slept. Anwara, weak-kneed with relief, snatched up her shawl and ran up the single grassy street in the bright spring afternoon to tell old Bess she had found the cure. Yano sat down at last to his porridge, but he kept an uneasy eye on the truckle bed. It was plain they must never run short of honey. "Best watch for another wild bee swarm," he told himself, "and braid another straw scap to bring it home to. Plenty of room for 3 hives out beyond the garden." Old Bess listened to Anwara's tale of triumph, noting with sinking heart the baby's telltale rejection of St. John's wort and love of sweets. But she spoke only to encourage her daughter. "No, no, my love, a spoonful of honey will not harm Saskia. No doubt it soothes her throat. Many little ones like honey." She did not add that very few turned scarlet with fury or terror when their fathers came near them. Instead, she slid a few sidewise questions here and there into Anwara's overexcited chatter, and got the answer she dreaded. Yes, Yano had been standing quite close to the baby. Yes, wearing his belt with the iron buckle, like every other day, mother. What a question. And yes, the salt box was full. The salter had come through only yesterday. Was she needing a handful? When Anwara had gone her way, heading for the village well, where could she be sure of finding a few neighbors to share her good news? Old Bess sat a long, grim time and thought. The baby's birth had been normal. She had overseen it herself, and the child had been placed in placid and easy to care for until around about its christening day. This, as old Bess had known uneasily at the time, had been too long delayed. Father Bosa, who lived in the town several leagues away across the moor, prevented first by illness, then by a late snowstorm, had not visited the village until after the first lambs dropped, precisely when this colic had first appeared. Old Bess could not say, but neither she nor any other witness would forget that christening, with that babe squirming like an eel in the priest's arms, and screaming fit to deafen them all. The holy water went every which way, but whether a single drop fell on the baby's head only God could say. Old Bess felt sure that by that day the exchange had already been made. In the dark of some midwinter night the human child she had helped to birth had been snatched away to some hidden, heathen, elfish place, and this alien creature who had hated irons and salt and holy water had been left at the blacksmith's house instead. She had no appetite that evening for soup, and coarse flat bread. Once asleep, she got troubled with eerie dreams. At first light, she put on her shawl and walked down the crooked street to the little stone house next to the smithy. Yano had not yet gone to his forge, but was finishing his breakfast ale and chunk of bread. Anwara was bending over the hearth, setting the day's loaves on the stones to bake. She straightened in surprise, said, "Well, mother," dusted the barley flour off her hands, and came to set a stool for old Bess. Saskia, across the single room in her truckle bed, seemed fast asleep. "I must talk with you," said old Bess heavily. With a sigh she dragged off her shawl, sat down, and told them what she feared and why she feared it. For a moment they simply gaped at her, stunned and speechless. "You are mad," Anwara whispered in a trembling voice. Old Bess, unable to watch her daughter's stricken face or Yano's still one, found her glance pulled toward the truckle bed. The child had raised itself and was staring straight at her with wide-open tilted eyes, pure lavender. Their color changed at once to smoky green. Saskia flung herself back into the bedclothes and began to scream. Anwara was up in an instant, running to snatch the child into her arms, glaring over its struggling, twisting body at her mother. "There now," she cried furiously. "Just see what you've done with your wicked lies. Hush, my little one, shh." She patted and soothed and jiggled without the slightest effect, shouting over the racket, half sobbing that it was lies, all lies, and she would hear no more of it ever. "Will you not fetch the honey, wife?" Yano roared, and he himself strode across to the shelf and brought her the jug and the horn spoon. Saskia shrunk from him and screamed louder. He backed away, glancing at old Bess, who shrugged. "It is not you, Yano. It is the iron you have about you." "God's mercy, woman, I am the smith. I will always have iron about me. Then she will always shrink from you." Yano dropped onto his stool again, his gaze on his daughter, whom the honey had quieted. "I cannot believe it," he muttered. "I must not. I will not." "Nor will any folk in their senses," snapped Anwara. She held the baby close, turned a defiant shoulder to her mother. "I beg you will not spread that gossip in the village. Think of Gwyn ever wanting to belittle Yano and Helsa and that sour wife of Guthwick the potter. Ah, what she would give to put me down. And besides, the talk. They would all come here, prying, peering into the window. Daughter, I am no gossip," said old Bess, "or liar either." Anwara fell silent, but her face was hard and closed. "Do you not want your true child back?" old Bess pleaded. "If you would believe me, I have my child. She is here in my arms." "Nay, wife, peace, peace." Yano waved her quiet with a big hand and turned to old Bess. "Supposing we did believe you, nay, Anwara, let me have my word now. Supposing it was all so, what should we do then, eh, old woman? How could we rid ourselves of the pixie, or elf thing, or Moorchild, or whatever it is, and get our own babe back?" Old Bess had dreaded the question. "There are ways, I'm told." She chose the mildest. "The changeling will be gone in a blink, so they say, if it is only made to tell its age, for it may be no babe at all, but older than old." "Then we must wait for the great news till Saski's old enough to talk," retorted Anwar with a scornful laugh. Yano thought about this and raised his bushy eyebrows at old Bess. "Aye, so far as little one speaks no word even a heathen could understand. Tell us another cure." Old Bess took a deep breath. "I have heard, but I cannot swear it, that the folk will come and take their creature back, if it be thrown into a well, or onto the fire, or sorely beaten." "Fire? Beaten?" Anwara gasped. She backed away, clutching the now silent child tighter than ever. "I do such to a babe I bore? Whatever are you saying? But that is not the babe you bore," cried her mother. "That is not even a human child." Yano's deep rumble broke in. "Enough, let be." His gaze old Bess had turned somber. "You mean well, old woman, but I'll hear no more of these cures. I doubt I could so ill treat any creature, not when it looks so like a child." Old Bess looked at their faces, rose, put on her shawl, and went back to her own hearth, her feet heavy and slow with her failure. She had spoken too soon, or not soon enough, She had troubled her son-in-law, set her daughter's face against her, and only hardened her defense of the baby Sasaki. Now there is nothing to do but wait for the time and trouble to change their minds. While Anwara, torn between fear and fury, went brooding about her daily tasks, Sasaki lay in the truckle bed, uncharacteristically silent. She too was brooding, and she was thinking hard. She was not much in the habit of thinking, only of howling her bitter, lonely anger at her exile from all she knew and understood, her homeland, the folk, and their paths crisscrossing the moor, her numberless kin. She neither tried nor wished to understand the alien human life around her, though the long days caged in the hateful truckle bed, bored and homesick, she had done little but rage and grieve. She cared nothing for her jailers, not the young woman who fed her, the tasteless gruel and half smothered over the embraces, not the old woman who was her enemy, not the man with his fearful, threatening iron. They might live out their clumsy human lives or die tomorrow for all of her. They might have their own babe back with their good will. Indeed, nothing would have pleased her more than to be gone in a blink, as the old woman said, back home to the mound and the moorfolk, leaving this truckle bed to all its silly, frightful owner. But she had no fancy for all these cures. To be beaten by that great hulking man with his fists like mallets and his smell of iron was a terrifying thought. As for being thrown into the fire, Yano's scruples would vanish the moment he stopped thinking of her as a child, and soon or late, with that old woman's help, he would stop. Besides, suffering his blows would serve no purpose. The folk might whisk her away from him, but they'd only cast her out a second time, changed for some different human child, and to be put twice to the trouble would annoy them. Next time they might drop her into a far worse place to pay her out. As for telling her age, nobody could trick her into that, for she did not know it herself, only that she was still a youngling, just old enough for the others to discover that she could not hide. She had left the nursery some time before and moved into schooling house with the rest of the half-grown young ones of the band to learn the work in the paths. Every twilight she joined one of the ever-shifting groups of younglings led by old Flugenlow or Noddlesome or some other mentor, raced with them out of the earthen doorway of the schooling house across the vast twinkling cavern known as the Gathering and up the long twisting twining staircase of the mound, chattering while they did their evening's work. Sometimes he led them down into the wood at the moor's edge to gather twigs for firewood, or along the fringes of the lake below that to cut reeds for bundling into torches. Mostly they stayed on the high moor collecting thistle silk for the spinners back in the mound, and tufts of wool left here and there by the humans browsing sheep. They found old twists of cobweb for the weavers and cord makers, wild fruits and herbs and mushrooms for the cooks, bracken and leaves and grasses for renew and sweeten the beds. Occasionally a couple of the bravest Smir or Tinqua stole away to the village and into a farmer's stable to spend a giggling hour tangling his horse's mane or tying the cows' tails together. The braggart Elsnik boasted of venturing into the farmhouse itself to tickle the sleeping humans with ice-cold hands, but nobody believed him. It was only the elder folk who dared such pranks. Some whole evenings the younglings spent watching over the tiny moon-white folk cows with their red horns and eyes, at midnight driving them back to their hidden byre. Now and then they did no work at night, but stole old Flugenlow's bagpipes and took turns playing them, or tied his beard to his waistcoat button and snatched his red cap and danced just out of reach when he grabbed at them. Before dawn they filed back through the boulder-hidden portal again and down the long stair, often mounting the handrail and spiraling down one after the other, and back to the schooling house, ready to sleep a while and eat something. Later an ever-curious youngling like Saskia, though that was not yet her name. In the mound it was Mucklkin. A curious few like Muckle might venture together out into the Gathering, the mound's central common. It was a vast airy cave, the Gathering, a hollow in the rough crystalline rock. They twinkled and glinted in the upper dimness as it caught the light in a million pinpoints. The light came from cold fire torches embedded in the rock walls, from scattered cook fires around which couples or groups collected and dispersed as impulse or hunger moved them, and from the greenish glow that was ever present to the mound. There was constant flitting up and down the twisting stairway as the moor folk with their dark, clever faces and floating pale hair went about their erratic pursuits and whatever work was necessary to keep the band prosperous and well fed. Among them the little knots of younglings could wander, elbows or long fingers touching, big slanted eyes observing the life of their elders, a life freer and wilder but as haphazard as their own. "I see your mamma," they teased each other. "There, see that ugly one over there?" It was a silly joke, only the youngest fresh from the nursery ever stared about, saying, "Where, where?" Muckle was the one who at first had stared eagerly around, but then she saw that all the others were giggling, so after a moment she giggled too. No youngling knew its mother, only that it must have had one. Each mother cosseted and adored her baby until the nursery took over. Then she forgot it and returned to the gathering and a different mate and the careless life of the folk, in which a great deal of everybody's time, whether in the mound or outside of the human's world, was spent in dancing, feasting, mischief, idling, and dreaming. Food gathering was a game of light-fingered skill, stealing eggs from the moor-hens' nests, nuts from the squirrels' hoards, lentils and milk from the villagers and their cows. They boasted of their pranks around the cook fires. One had stripped a farmer's honeycombs, another emptied a fisherman's basket as fast as he filled it, a third had shared a shepherd's lunch. The younglings eavesdropped on the set tales and could hardly wait till they were full grown and skilful too. It was a life without yesterdays or tomorrows, life as it was meant to be, Muckle thought then, when she knew no other, and it went on seamlessly until she and the other younglings had finished their nighttime learning and began to go abroad by day, to find out about dogs and iron and crosses and humans who were not safely asleep, but awake and wary. They were taught to find the paths in sunlight, to note and heed the runic signs left by the folk on barns or gates or doorways, to make secret runes themselves. Then one day they were called upon to hide, and everything ended in a wink of an eye for Muggleton. It was suddenly a test and a harsh one. That morning they were not allowed to lurk behind things while an elder pointed out a man, a woman, a shepherd boy, a cross dog, and a silly dog, and warned them of cats which could always see the folk and were to be avoided. Instead, they were abruptly turned loose to go where they would, in plain sight of each other in the human world. "But mind now, if one of them comes to long hide," warned Pitiskin, who was instructing them that day. "Not while they're gawking straight at you. Wait till they blink. Then you can do a shape change, or a color change, or go dim-like, or run up a tree, or just wink out. That's best if you hold your breath till you can slip behind a rock or something. But don't let them see you here. You'll endanger the band." He strolled away, turning back casually. "If you muff it and get caught, remember about the gold." "What if they're on our path, though?" Muckle asked him, peering uneasily over her shoulder. She found this much freedom scary. A chorus of youngling voices piped up. "Pinch 'em, trip 'em, pull their hair. Change into an adder, a hornet, a bear." "A bear?" echoed somebody, and the belligerents dissolved in laughter. But Pitiskin snapped, "The pads are ours. However you do it, keep them off." He turned away again, took a flying leap into a chestnut tree, and began to tease Jinka, with whom he had paired off lately, and the long leaves into her silvery hair. And wind the long leaves into her silvery hair. The younglings, left to their own devices, drifted apart, some joining playmates higher up the moor, others searching for mushrooms at the edge of the woodland. Muckle found a few wild berries and wandered from bush to bush with no heed to where she was straying until she all but fell over a big brown gray-faced ewe lying in the shade of a clump of a bracken. The ewe stumbled to its feet with a noisy blah blah and galloped off. Muckle, equally startled, looked around to find the flock scattered about the hillside and herself in its midst, with every woolly gray face turned her way. The shepherd, not a boy either, but a full-grown man, carrying a dangerous-looking crook, was striding across the flank of the hill straight toward her, with his jaw dropped and his eyes half starting from his head. "Hide, hide, hide!" shrilled a voice from somewhere, but it called in the secret tongue, which the folk understood well enough, but only made humans gawk about, trying to spot the unknown bird. Every youngling Muckle could see obeyed. The dozen playing a ring game near the crest had vanished, though quite a number of crows, with a chicken or two oddly mixed in, now pecked in the same spot among the grasses. Out of the corner of her eye Muckle glimpsed Tinqua running like a red-capped lizard up an outcrop, with Zmur, already rock-colored, right behind, with the shepherd's eye full on her. She herself dared only shrink a bit and go bluish, like the shadows under the bracken, fighting off panic as she waited for him to blink. Suddenly a near-transparent shape, it was Elsk, darted from behind a berry bush and flung a handful of dirt into the shepherd's staring eyes, and then he had to squint and rub them. Thankfully Muckle gulped in her breath to wink out, held it hard, and left the flimsy shelter of the bracken to dash in invisible safety across the open space toward Elsk's bush. She had scarcely started when a large hand grasped the back of her hooded jacket and yanked her off her feet to dangle like a puppy held by its scruff. She gasped, realizing the trick must not have worked. Why not? She was sure to be visible now, for the jerk had shaken her held breath loose. In terror she kicked and struggled, trying to change to an eel, to a horned toad, trying to turn a fearsome bright yellow with red spots, trying desperately to hold her breath again, whether the man was watching or not, but nothing would work while he held her. From all around came the cries of the unknown bird as the folk shrieked for her to try what she was already trying, warned her needlessly that it was a man. Then the shepherd's dog rose among the grasses and began to bark, and the voices ceased amid a sudden clapping of wings. The crows flapped aloft. The few chickens stretched out their necks and ran helter-skelter. Muckle could not see whether Elsk was still behind the berry bush, or Zmur had Tinqua on the outcrop. She could not see any folk at all, twist how she would, because her captor had turned her to face him and was holding her still by a handful of jacket to look her over. Fearfully she raised her eyes to meet his astonished gaze. "A pixie, all right enough," he muttered. "Maybe a dark elf. What are you, little one? Can you talk a Christian tongue?" Muckle's lips clamped shut. The dog trotted closer, barking until the man silenced it. "Can't or won't," said the shepherd. "Be you full grown?" "Shouldn't think so. Near the size of my 5-year-old, but skinnier. No more weight to you than a kitten." He turned her this way and that, lifted her higher to study her long arched feet. How my little Davy'd like to peek at you. But you might do him a mischief, so you might. There's tales of your kind. He scrutinized her a moment longer, then burst into a gleeful laugh. "So I went and caught one sure enough. I never held them with stories. They'll call me a liar over at the moor in my village." He paused. "Lest I bring you back with me." Muckle squirmed desperately. She couldn't help it. The man's eyes narrowed. "By Gorkins, I think you do know what I'm saying." He peered at her, frowning a little. "Here now, I mean you no harm, Pixie." Muckle squirmed again, this time with annoyance. The folk did not care to be confused with distant, possibly low-born cousins. "Here, we'll strike a bargain. They say your kind has got stores of gold hid all around these hills." "Is it so, then?" Muckle went still. "If you muff it and get caught, remember about the gold." "It is," she said, her voice so shaky and squeaky she could barely hear it herself. The man said, "Eh?" and held her up to his hairy ear. She gathered her strength and shrilled, "It is!" straight into it, so that he held her away hastily. "Right, then, just show me where, you see, and I'll let you go, I will." Muckle knew what to do next, but the dog, a terrible shaggy creature with bright, intent eyes, was sitting just below her with a tongue as long as her forearm, lolling out between his wicked teeth. "I'm afeard of him," she said. "Oh, never you mind about Trusty. He'll do as he's bid and naught else. Here, off with you, boy. Round up your stragglers." The shepherd waved his crook, and the dog loped away as if the gesture had flung him. "Now, no tricks, little one. Where's the treasure hid?" "Let me loose, and I'll take you there." It was worth a try. He only laughed at her. Think I'm an Ottakins? You'll be off before I think. Just tell me straight. Well, gold's down in the woods yonder, buried. You find the 5th tree west of the Red Fox's hole. Then you walk a snake length south and find old Twilligard's sign on a fallen log. Lesson the moss has covered it. Then you go where it says, and here, hold on. Where's this Red Fox's hole? How will I find that? Mockle shrugged as well as she could, for one suspended in midair. I know where 'tis. You'll have to hunt. Nay, then, you'll have to show me, the shepherd retorted. He gave her a hitch and shifted his grasp to her middle, tucking her under his arm like a parcel as he strode down toward the woods. There wasn't any Fox's hole, red or otherwise, but Mockle pointed to something and he took her word for it. Then they struggled along what she told him was a snake's length south, which led him through nettles and brambles straight up to a dense thicket with not a fallen log in sight. Here he balked, to her relief, since she was sore and breathless from the jolting. He held her up again and glowered at her. Think me a muggins, do you? I'll go no farther. You tell me straight now, or I'll give you to the dog. It's just yonder, she said hastily, pointing at random. Twixt the roots of that big oak. You'll have to dig. You'll dig, Pixie. He stalked over to the oak and swung her down among the ancient roots, keeping a fast hold on her jacket. Gladly she burrowed into the soft mold of earth and last year's leaves, and in a moment twisted toward him, offering a little handful of golden coins, with the dirt still clinging to them. His eyes bulged. Slowly he took them, letting his crook fall. He bit one. By faith, they're real, he whispered. By jings, I never believed it. Plenty more, Mockle told him. Here, move aside, Pixie, let me there. He sighed, suddenly brisk. I can dig faster nor you. He swept her away and fell to work. She didn't tarry to watch. One jubilant leap, and she was among the branches already leaf-color. Next moment she was safe in a high crotch, hugging the mossy trunk, and fading to grey-green to match it, or trying to. She peered anxiously at her doubled-up legs, her hands. Yes, grey-green as moss, as lichen. It was all right, she knew how. The other was some kind of mistake that would never happen again. From here and there in the neighboring trees came bird-like giggles, in which she joined with relief and delight, her heart still pounding, but her self-esteem swelling like a bubble. She had served that great Gorm a turn, she had. Now she would have something to boast of. Clumsy youngling, said a caustic voice from a branch above her. The bubble burst. She looked up into Prettiskin's disdainful countenance. I did it right, she protested. The gold trick, everything else wrong. Slow, bad, risky. You never winked out at all. Before she could argue, there came an outraged bellow from the foot of the tree, followed by, Pixie, where'd you get to? Ah, that hoaxing creature. I might have known. She glanced down through the leaves at the shepherd's head and burly shoulders. The gold would have turned back into leaf mold by now. She no longer relished the joke. Stonily she watched as he turned this way and that, calling her several words she'd never heard before, then stopped up the hill to a sheep. Back to the mound, Pittiskin ordered. At midday? But we barely... You mean all of us? But we'll learn. We're only beginners. Nay, just you. The others are beginners. You're a blunderhead. Pittiskin landed on her branch, seized her hand, and leaped, half floating to the ground, taking her along willy-nilly. She waited and tugged her to her free hand. Let me try again. I'll do better. Give over now. He silenced her with a yank, headed swiftly for the nearest folk path. You maybe can't. There's something amiss with you, youngling. I don't know what. We'll have to see to the prince. I suspicion you're a menace to the band. They found the prince on his rock ledge, a quarter way up the wall of the gathering, where he liked to lounge on one elbow, among his leafy cushions, head propped on one long-fingered hand, watching the antics and comings and goings of his folk below. He was old, the prince, and seldom went out onto the moor any more, except on May Day, or the harvest dancing, or Midsummer's Eve. His hair had grown white under its jaunty red cap, and his beard long, but his tilted eyes were as bright and knowing as ever. He was already watching as Pittiskin climbed nimbly up the rough-hewn wall toward him. pulling the reluctant Muckle behind, and he spoke first as they reached the ledge. "So, pretty skin, a bit of trouble, have we?" He addressed the elder, but his gaze fastened on Muckle, who shrank a little under it, feeling much smaller and more uncertain than usual, with no youngling beside her to touch elbows with, or indeed anywhere around. She had never come face to face with the prince before. "Aye, a bit of trouble about this size," Prettyskin answered with a jerk of his head at Muckle. "Big trouble can come in little parcels," the prince remarked. "What's your name, my dear?" "Muckinkin," Muckle quavered. "She can't hide," Prettyskin added baldly. "Yes, I can. I just... Sst." She was silenced by a yank on her arm, which Prettyskin still held fast. He informed the prince in a few blunt sentences of the morning's events. She'd stumbled over the yew, caught the shepherd's eye, mucked up a color change, failed to wink out, left shelter, and run straight into the man's hands. She'd been caught, asked a lot of questions, luckily been too scared to answer, finally minded her of the gold trick, and managed to pull it off. He made her sound a blunderhead indeed, but she could not find any actual lie. The prince looked at her thoughtfully and went straight to the heart of the matter. "You can't wink out?" "Aye, I can. Leastways, I thought I—" Muckle faltered. She'd played at it, along with the other younglings, catching her breath, holding it until she had to giggle and let go. Nobody had ever told her she hadn't gone transparent like the others. Nobody had ever told her she had. "Maybe I muddled it," she said in a small voice. "No way to muddle it," the prince told her. "You can do it or you can't. Let's see you try." She swallowed. "Right now?" "Right now." She gasped in a big breath and held it hard, her eyes squeezed shut. "See that?" remarked Prettyskin. "And you can tell she's trying." Muckle deflated with a rush, opened her eyes in dismay to find herself being studied by two speculative pairs of eyes. "What do you think?" said Prettyskin, but not to her. Instead of answering, the prince said, "Try a shape change, little one." "I'll change to a dragon, then you'll be sorry," thought Muckle. She tried, but she knew she had never yet managed a real shape change. Only small alterations in her own shape and color. She'd always thought she'd pick it up, grow into it, like. Plainly, she was wrong. The prince was chewing meditatively on the tip of his beard, gazing past her, or through her, into some thought of his own. He wore a red jewel on a chain around his neck. It glowed like a drop of blood against his worn green waistcoat. He spoke suddenly to Prettyskin. "Do you recollect, it was a time ago, somebody coaxed one of them into the mound? Great towering fellow with hair like a horse's mane." Prettyskin gave a curt nod. "I recollect. Not sure who coaxed him in, but I've kept an eye on the little ones coming out of the nursery." He glanced at Muckle. "It's no surprise." "What isn't?" Muckle ventured. She was ignored. "Jinka, was it?" the prince said. "Talabar, I think. I'll fetch her." Prettyskin loosened Muckle's arm, made a floating leap down to the floor of the gathering, and became one red cap among many. The prince lounged back on his cushions. It seemed about Muckle they had suddenly forgotten all about her. Relieved, she turned to follow Prettyskin. "You stay here, my dear," the prince said without opening his eyes. The relief vanished like bog mist. For a moment she gazed mournfully down at the folk moving about below her, for whom this day was free and untroubled like any other. Then she dropped onto a low stone and hugged her knees. "A fisherman he was, I think," the prince said, to himself or her she couldn't tell. "Brawny young lad. She coaxed him to follow her, see? The folk will do it, now and then. Well, they take a fancy to them. But she tired of him before the baby was born, sent him back outside. I wager that fisherman's sorry now he ever took up with the folk." Muckle studied the prince's beaky profile, his closed eyes, his beard that waggled slightly with every word, puzzling over the tale and why he was telling it. It seemed to have nothing to do with her morning's blundering. "Why is the fisherman sorry now?" she asked. One bright eye opened to peer at her from under a tangled brow. "Why, that lad be 55 years older from the minute he stepped outside again. Likely found a young brother working in nets and boat. Friends dead and gone." Muckle not sure what friends meant, or brother either. "Time runs different in the mound," the prince remarked, and closed the eye again. She knew about that in a general way, without understanding quite what it meant to the fisherman. What happened to the baby that was near to born? She hazarded. Aye, that's the question, cried the prince. He sat straight up and jabbed a long finger at her. However, he offered no answer. Mockle gave it up and turned to watch for Pitiskin, who at that moment scrambled onto the ledge along with Talabar. Talabar was a beauty, her floating hair more silvery than most, her tilted eyes a purer lavender, the curve of her che- yeah, cheek more gentle. She swept a smiling, surprised glance from Muckle to the prince. So, Talabar, the prince greeted her genially, was you coaxed that fisher lad into the mound, love? Tall young fella, black hair, quite a time ago? She pondered a moment, a long, graceful finger gently patting her pursed lips. Muckle watched anxiously from her low stone seat, wanting her to remember about her father, lad, and explain what he had to do with this blundering morning. She was rewarded as Talabar's face suddenly cleared. "Oh, aye, the fisherman!" she exclaimed. "His name was Powell, or maybe Harold. He was lovely, so handsome." "Ah," said the prince, "and he was among up here for quite a space, was he not, my dear?" "He was, prince. Virgil! That was his name, I think. Yes, Virgil. But he kept wanting me to go home with him. They always do, I've warned you." Talabar shrugged her delicate shoulders. "So finally I said yes, I will if you go first. So he left, but of course I stayed here. There was going to be a baby." She smiled and shrugged again. "It was a long time ago." "This long," said the prince, and pointed to Mockle. Suddenly everybody was looking at Mockle. She stared up at them, going numb all over as she finally caught a glimmering of what this all had to do with her. Calabar smiled down at her. "Oh, is it you, little duckling? What a dear baby you were, sweet as honeycomb." With a light touch on Mockle's hair, she turned back to Prince. "That's all you wanted of me?" "That's all. Run along, my dear." Calabar laughed, glancing back for one more smile and a little wave to Mockle, who sat gazing after her like a small stone image, trying to comprehend. She herself was that baby. Calabar was her mother. She whispered the word, trying it out with no idea how to react to it. The younglings teased about mothers, but never knew nor asked which was whose. What did you do if you found out? Would everything be different? Would anything? Not for Talabar. She had jumped lightly off the ledge and gone back to her life. Not for me either, then. Muckle was just deciding when the prince spoke to her. "So, it's all clear now, little one. That's your trouble," he said genially. "Father's that fisher lad." Father? Mockle's muddled thoughts had gone no further than mother. Fathers were never even teased about. They barely existed. Why is that a trouble? "Well, you're misbegotten, half human, you see. Danger to the band having you round." He smiled at Mockle, then turned to Pritiskin, who was leaning with folded arms against the rock wall behind him. "You know of a chance?" "Half a dozen," was the answer. "Take the nearest." The prince turned back to Mockle. "There, you see how simple?" Muckle found herself on her feet without knowing she'd moved. Wordless, she shook her head. She was beginning to understand and trying not to. "Why, you'll be changed, my dear. We'll just swap you for a human child who will make a good servant to the band. Half humans never work out amongst the folk. No, never do." "But I'm half folk too?" Muckle swallowed hard, trying to swallow the inescapable next thought. "What if I never work out amongst the humans?" The prince, musing, seemed not to hear the question. You're neither one thing nor quite the other," he agreed. "Pity, but there it is." Muckle stared at him and suddenly found her tongue. "I won't go. I don't want to be changed. I want to stay here. I don't like humans. I won't be one. I don't know how. Please don't make me." Now," said the prince, frowning. "It's what we always do." "Stop making a bother," said Pitiskin, straining from the wall and ambling toward her. "But I'm scared. What'll it feel like? Why can't I?" Pitiskin already had hold of her arm. "Hist! It's settled. Come along." Muckle pulled back, throwing a last despairing look at the prince, who smiled reassuringly at her. "Won't hurt, my dear. I promise. Won't even know till there you are." "But where?" Muckle asked him. "Nearby, but outside, in your father's world. The fisher lad's world." Muckle blinked rapidly, her thoughts rushing about. Will I be 50-odd years older then?" she quavered. They both laughed at her. "No fear, youngling," said the prince, stretching out full length amongst his cushions. "You'll be starting all over, luck to you." He closed his eyes. Starting all over? She wanted to ask him what that meant, but he seemed to have gone to sleep. Pitiskin gave a little tug on her arm and jerked his head toward the shelf's edge. This time she did not resist. Starting all over, outside. As they crossed the gathering, she glanced toward the stairway spiraling up toward the moor. "Will I go through the door, then?" she asked Pitiskin. "When I'm changed?" "No, no, nothing like that. Quit your fretting. But when will it happen?" "When it can." "But—" "Hist," he said, and with a little yank on her arm that was meant he was tired of her plaguing him. It was too much. She gave a choked little gulp, as hot tears sprang to her eyes, blurred the twinkling cavern and the cook fires, and the restless throng of the folk spilled over to run down her cheeks, confusing her worse than ever because she had never done such a thing as cry before, but then she had never felt so miserable before. Pitiskin eyed her in astonishment. Cry-babying, are you? Now that's a human trick, that is. But I can't help it. How'll I do without the folk? The mound? Mogul could scarcely talk for the great lonesome lump of grief in her throat. "Oh, don't fret about that. You'll forget all about us. Prince'll see to it." "Forget the mound? The folk?" Mogul stopped crying to stare in disbelief and dismay. To forget everything and everyone she knew, it seemed worse than all the rest. "You mean as soon as I'm changed?" "Dunno just when," Pitiskin said vaguely. "Soon enough, I dare say. Now step along." In another moment they arrived at schooling house, and he waved her through the earthen door. "Just eat your porridge and go to bed. Leave the wurritin to the prince." He gave her a pat, then strode away. She watched him thread through the crowd, then turned into the vaulted main cavern of the house. She found it unexpectedly full of younglings collected in little knots of 3 or 4, hands or elbows touching, all looking at her. They had heard then. "Help me," she whispered. After a moment Smur said, "Can't." He shrugged, glancing at Elsk and Tinqua, who shrugged too. Their unblinking shiny eyes watched her, curious but unexcited. They were as unconcerned as the prince himself. She had a flash of recognition that she was different from them, half human. It must be human, this tearing apart that she was feeling, when they felt nothing. Yet she knew if Smur or Elsk or Tinqua were to be changed, she too would likely stare curiously but not really care, so long as she still had the mound and the band, half folk too. Neither one thing nor yet quite t'other. She turned away, wandered out into the corridor, and stood looking at nothing. Then she walked into the food room. She sat by herself at a long table, ate porridge she never tasted, and went to bed as Pitiskin had ordered. But inside she began to rage and scream. She awoke raging and screaming in the truckle bed. She was shivering with cold, frightened, confused. She was in a low-ceilinged, smoky room full of threatening smells and noises. A door banged open, and an icy wind rushed in before the man forced it shut. Through the opening she had glimpsed snow and icicles. It was winter then? But only a blink of an eye ago, so it seemed, it had been late summer. Time ran different in the mound. The man was standing over her, staring down. A wave of terror swept her. He smelled of iron. He wore iron. He seemed fearsomely made of iron. She shrieked and frantically waved arms so short and helpless that she realized at last what starting over meant. Various faces came and went in her line of vision. A woman, an old woman, the fearsome man. "She can't be hungry. Stand away, Yano. I'll take her up. Poor little Saskia. There, there." She was gathered up bodily, swung about until she gasped with dizziness and had to quit screaming to breathe. The woman crooned and called her Saskia again. She struggled, yelled, pushed against the woman's constricting arms until she was put down again in the truckle bed. It smelled of straw, not ferns and leaves, and crackled every time she moved. Exhausted, she lay still, hoping to sleep and wake back up in the mound, or even to forget as Pitiskin had promised, but she woke up still in her prison. For days that stretched into weeks she dreamed of the mound, but awoke still there in the low-ceilinged little room smelling of wood smoke. The Iron Man clumped in and out. The woman moved here and there, clattering some things and thumping others, but she herself seldom dared stir from the truckle bed. Once or twice, waking to find herself alone in the house, she fought free of the covers, scampered across the floor on her two short little legs, and took a run around the room and up the wall just for the joy of movement. A startled face at the window one day put an end to that. She barely made it back under the sheepskin before a sharp-eyed neighbor woman was in the room and staring down at her. When the woman of the house came home and found them so, there was a hideous argle-bargle that made her ears ring. After that she could scarcely move but what that woman Anwara was there beside her, smothering her in wrappings as tight as a moth's cocoon, picking her up and putting her down, and when she protested, offering her poisons like St. John's wort. Mockle hated the truckle bed, and scorned the woman and feared the man, and never stopped raging unless she was so tired she had to sleep. Until the day the old woman came and told them she was a changeling, and the dreadful things they could do about it. The day she realized that there was to be no escape, even in forgetting. Pittiskin had lied, or the prince had not seen to it. Painfully she forced herself to accept it. She'd been a blunderhead again. She saw now that she must try on her own to forget the mound, instead of screaming to get back there. She must scream only enough to get the honey and ease the endless tedium. She must try to act like a human child. She must play-act learning the simpleton speech she already understood well, and pretend she could no more climb a wall than an ordinary baby. She must blot out all she knew except to be aware of that old woman which she must never forget. She did not really believe she could do any of these things, but she began trying, and it began to work, to keep herself from thinking of the folk paths, and the prince, and the cook fires, and the twinkling lights of the gathering. She counted the stones in the cottage wall, the bowls on the shelf, the birch boughs holding up the thatch, and listened closely to the kettle's song, or watched the ribbon of smoke as it curled up from the hearth to swirl out the hole in the roof. She pretended she had never seen heather or sat in a tree-top, that she had never been anyone but Saskia, and slowly the door to memory swung shut. The speech around her became mysterious. She began to learn it anew. She waved her tiny arms and legs, and as they grew longer and stronger, she began to crawl, then stand, then stagger from the cot to Anwara, from Anwara to the cot, and sometimes to Yano, of whom she was no longer terrified, only wary, without quite knowing why. In this way, doubtless just as the prince had arranged it, she buried deep within herself the knowledge that she had once been Mockle. So the squalling and screaming at the blacksmith's house dwindled to normal levels, and the profound relief of Yano and Anwara, who gave thanks on their knees for the colic's end. The neighbors were relieved too, but the gossip among the women around the village did not end with the colic. Helsa, the wife of Alun, still claimed she had once seen Anwara's infant leap from the truckle bed and run straight up the wall to perch cat-like on the rafter. "A body can be mistaken," said the miller's wife Berinda. "I was not mistaken. The devil himself couldn't make me say else." The others refrained from comment. Nobody, apart from old Bess, who had her secret reasons, believed Helsa's story. They thought she'd snooped into Anwara's house one day and been caught at it. But everybody except Anwara, who was plainly betrothed, admitted the child was strange. "So out of the ordinary," said Berinda. "I'm sure none of mine ever behaved so." She threw a complacent glance down at her own little Pelia, the youngest of 8, who was clinging to her apron, sucking a thumb. "Aye, you've got the good fortune for certain." "Your young ones are perfectly ordinary," commented a new voice dryly. Old Bess had appeared beside them unnoticed, as she so often did. And now it may be we can all talk about something else." There was a brief silence. Farron, the potter's wife, tittered. Berinda's color was rather high, but no one cared to annoy old Bess, so the subject was changed. Old Bess doubted that the gossip was even well started, but she was glad for Anwara and Yano's sake that Saskia had quieted, and even began to hope that their ill-timed mention of changelings had been forgiven, not forgotten. Whenever she entered Anwara's house, the little one fixed an uneasy gaze on her and kept it there as long as she stayed, and Yano often brooded. However, she said no more, only waited. A year went by, then others, and Saskia grew from an ill-favored baby to an odd, outlandish-looking little girl. No one dared say so. Anwara would turn like a tiger on anyone venturing a comment. But all you needed, thought old Bess, were eyes in your head. The other village children were red-cheeked and sturdy, ranging from brunette to blonde like ordinary Christians. Saskia's dusky skin had ever lightened, while her wild bush of hair was paler than ever. She was wiry and small for her age. Her slight little body, topped with a head that seemed larger because of all that hair framing a pointy-chinned, snub-nosed face. To old Bess she seemed too strong for her size, with longer fingers and toes than was common. But if Saskia spied anyone frowning at them, those same fingers and toes suddenly looked as short and chubby as any child's. Though old Bess could never quite decide whether any real change had occurred, it was otherwise with the child's eyes, which were as variable as ever, shifting from green to smoky gray to match her moods, with glimpses of that startling lilac when she was into mischief, and to a mirror-like dark that was a defense, old Bess was sure, against the stairs. There were always stairs, and more than one villager crossed himself as Saskia went by, for the tales had never quit circulating. There was the poor yield of Yano's pea crop one year, and the weevils that got into everybody's barley malt the next. Both were whispered to be Saskia's doing. When Guthwick Old's cow dropped a two-headed calf, it was soon blamed on that child having overlooked the animal in its labor. No use pointing out that Guthwick's half-grown boys had been there looking too. Old Bess did her best to stifle the gossip, but day or night Saskia was up to something. She seemed to need little sleep, felt no sensible fear of darkness, and could see as well as midnight as at noon. Despite her frantic parents' warnings, she would slip outdoors in the wee hours, scramble up onto the thatch, and watch the moon a while, or wander into the night. She was forever missing, and Yano fetching her back from the woods, or oftener from the moor, plainly more at home in the wilds than in her cottage, thought old Bess. She held her tongue, but the words she never spoke so tolled like a bell in the back of her mind. Sometimes she was tempted to take matters into her own hands and try one of the drastic cures. Her best chance came late one autumn, the morning Saskia turned 6. Yano decreed that she must begin to do her share of the family labor and sent her out with the other little ones to gather firewood. It was her first such encounter without Anwara somewhere near. But then all the young of the village had overheard much of their elders' talk. Old Bess, gathering leaves and silverweed in the edge of the woods, heard piping voices and drifted silently closer. "I know you. You're the smith's Saskia." It was Brenda's little Rob talking. After a moment, "Aye, the smith's my da." "Who's yours?" "Gwyn, the miller. We've got 100 sheep and a horse. My dad owns the mill. I've got 4 brothers and 3 sisters. You haven't got any." No reply. "I know, 'cause my mother told me." "Here, Orrin, it's the smith's girl, that one." Other voices. "The freaky odd one?" Greta, cross herself. Mama said to. "Why, will she hurt us?" A pause of uncertainty. Nobody had an answer. Somebody asked experimentally, "Are you a changeling?" And old Bess's heart gave a deep thump. Saskia. "What's that?" It was plain nobody really knew. "Something eldritch." Rob pronounced at last, adding bossily, "You're not to pick up our wood. We got here first." Saskia. "'Tisn't anybody's wood. I'll pick up what I see. Not the best bits, or I'll tell my dad." Other voices. "Me too, I'll tell mine." Saskia. "Do it then, and I'll tell mine." A thoughtful silence during which old Bess felt sure a vision of brawny Yano appeared in every mind. That line of torment was abandoned. A girl's high-piping, "How come your hair's like that?" Saskia stonily, "Like what?" "Like that? It's funny, like a haystack." Some titters, a few shushings. "Your eyes are funny too, they're strange." "She's eldritch. A strangeling." More titters, "Freaky odd." Old Bess, now spying uneed from the tangle of hawthorn around her their little clearing, saw Saskia standing motionless within the ragged circle 6 children had formed around her. They probed, got no answers, fell to squabbling among themselves. Saskia merely watched, her fingers and toes at their chubbiest, her sharp glance moving from one face to another. A bold demand to know if she could truly run straight up a wall was met with apparent deafness. A taunt that the cat must have got her tongue provoked a brief, bright green glare, and the tongue thrust out as far as it would go. A chant of "Creepy Daffy killed the old Caffy" brought swift action, not really to old Bess's surprise. Saskia could move quick as a lizard, and plainly could pinch hard where it hurt worse. The taunts turned to squeals or startled tears. The circle turned into a few subdued small children scattering to their tasks. Saskia did not stir until the others had wandered farther among the trees in search of twigs and broken branches. Then she faded so suddenly behind a hazel clump that old Bess nearly missed the movement, wondering if she would flee home and what she would tell Yano if she did. Old Bess swallowed, only to see her turn away from the village and head across a glade of open woodland used as a winter pasture. She made directly for a shallow hollow on the far side, and old Bess eased through the shielding thickets to the hollow's bottom, where there was a spring-fed pond. Merely thirsty, she decided. She found a peephole and peered through. Saskia was kneeling at the pond's edge, leaning over the water like a winged thing just alighted, long fingers braced on the grassy rim, hair like a strange cloud floating about her head. She had never looked less human despite her apron and dress. Now, said a voice suddenly in old Bess's mind, I could do it now and it would all be over. The pond was deep. One could simply tip the creature in, push her under, and in a twinkling she would burst out with a shriek and fly away to her elfland, and Awara would find her own dear child back in its cot. Then old Bess saw that the wide, tilted eyes were staring fixedly into the pond, and realized Saskia was not drinking, had not come to drink. She was trying to see her reflection, a hopeless task in water constantly stirred by the underground springs. No doubt she had little notion what she looked like. Well, who did? Thought old Bess. The only mirror in the village, a scratched disc of polished bronze, had been stolen by the gypsies years ago. When the light was right, one could see one's silhouette far down on the well's surface, or get a blurry glimpse of color and shape in the bottom of a tin pan, if one owned a pan of tin and kept it polished. Mainly one looked at other folk and had no real reason to wonder about oneself. Saskia now had good reason, but that pond with its moving surface would never answer her questions. After a moment she lifted a hand and pressed her hair as if trying to flatten it, sniffled angrily and pulled a crinkly lock around to peer at it cross-eyed. Finally she sat back on her heels and gazed past old Bess's hiding place, her eyes fading to grayish mauve, and her odd little face forlorn. Old Bess found herself curiously shaken, her thoughts in a tangle. Poor, unblessed creature! It may be she has no more wish to be here than we have to have her. Does she yearn as one of us might for her heathenish home? Does she even remember a place where she once belonged? Did she never belong even there? Saskia stirred, took a long breath. She leaned over the pool once more, and this time drank deep. It would have been even easier now to tip her in before she could have saved herself, but old Bess could no longer imagine doing so. In a moment Saskia stood up, brushed vaguely at the mud on her apron, and set off toward the woods in her task. Old Bess watched till the small figure was out of sight among the trees, then took up the bundle of herbs she had gathered and walked slowly home. She asked herself often in the next few years why she had not acted when she could, if it would not have been kinder to do so. She got no answer. But as she observed the children and Saskia growing up with them, it all seemed oddly familiar. She could have predicted that they would soon cease gaping and accept Saskia's share in their common tasks. She knew they would never count her one of them, or include her in their games, a strangeling. That was all well said. It was the same as their grandparents had decided years ago about old Bess herself. Several days after that first wood gathering, Saskia, squatting beside the hearth to turn on Wara's loaves, asked suddenly, "What's a changeling?" Abrupt silence. It lasted so long that she turned to see if Anwara had left the room, but there she sat, rigid as the churn beside her, clutching the plunger's handle, as if her hands had frozen to it. "Mamma?" said Saskia, half alarmed. Jerkily, the plunger began again its sloshing and thumping. "Now where did you hear that word?" asked Anwara, in a voice carefully careless. One of the young ones said it." Saskia shrugged the rest off. "What is it, then?" she muttered. "Just an old tale, nothing to it. Like as not." Anwara paused, forced to smile. "Fairies' pranks is what I've heard. The little imp things just stick a firewood, or some such, in a baby's cradle, and do a hoaxing charm, and nobody ever knows the difference." Anwara sniffed contemptuously. "Likely story. Fancy a mamma not knowing her own child." "Sounds witless," said Saskia, staring. "Whoever'd not know a stick of wood from a live baby, charm or not? If that was all, it was certain sure she was no changeling." "Stick of wood? Just more of the young ones plaguing. Passel numps they were." On the whole, after the first sting of anger and disappointment, she was more relieved than not to be an outcast, and found the children as alien as they found her. She thought their play stupid, their company tiresome. They could do nothing much and never tried, climbed trees like inchworms, scratching their legs and puffing with every hitch. Her own swift scampering caused stares and nudges that made her cautious. Being different made her uneasy, though she had forgotten why. By the time she was 9 years old she had schooled herself to move as they moved, when anyone was watching, but it was like living in fetters. She escaped to the moor whenever she could, despite Anwara's fears and Yano's stern warnings of its dangers, sometimes roaming there alone or perched on a grassy hillock, watching the sheep graze and listening for the curlew's hollow cry. Strange pictures stirred in her mind, a wisp of color and echo sounds, as if she had once known them in a dream, but the older she grew, the less she was able to bring the dream pictures clearer, however hard she tried, and she had a weary feeling that she should not try, should not study the faint markings that traced a luminous pattern across the bog and ask herself what they were, but only be careful to stay off them. If now and then she heard the cries of birds she could not name, she hastily shut her ears, then the back of her neck prickling, and hurried down the village, and her neglected tasks, preferring Anwara's scolding to the bleak loneliness that crept over at those sounds. It was no better in the cottage. She was lonely there, too, in the village, everywhere. She toughened herself to accept that life would always be so, and then in the spring she was 11. The tinker Bruman wandered through the village and up to the moor in his hooded pony cart, with his 3 goats, his old dog Warrior, and his orphan boy Tam. Part 2. Oops. I feel like I need to drink something. It has been an hour, so I'm going to drink something. I think I'll get tea. Hot tea. I'm back. How long has it been? Oh wow, it's been 40 minutes. Um, I accidentally knocked some glasses off of something, and then they broke, and then I had to sweep it up, and then I had to clean my blender because I wanted to use my blender because I wanted to blend the loose leaf tea so that it wouldn't be too like too gross, because sometimes you have loose leaf tea and it's like, and and the leaves are just like sitting there. It's like, yeah, you can chew them up and swallow them, but sometimes it's like not very fun. But anyway, so I blended tea and water. Well, actually, I made the tea, then I blended it with non-fat milk, powdered. So it's very very foamy. All right. Part 2. 5. Saskia had already had one encounter that morning, unexpected and unwelcome. Indeed, the whole day had started out poorly. She had neglected to turn the bread on the hearth, while Anwara was at the well, and 4 of the 6 loaves had burned, one worse than the others. Therefore that one, Yano decreed when he came in from stirring up the coals in his forge, should be her breakfast. Amara hurried to her defense, tried to hustle the burnt loaf into the fire and out of the argument. Yano retrieved it, lifted Saskia in his big, calloused hands, and set her firmly down in front of the table. "'Tis only right, because she was careless we eat burnt bread. She shall eat the burntest." Anwara, tight-lipped, immediately broke the best piece of her loaf and slid it over to Saskia. Saskia pushed it back to her with a shrug. "I was careless," she said, and began to eat the burnt loaf. She saw Anwara's face stiffen and realized with a familiar sinking feeling that she had again said the wrong thing, done the wrong thing. But why? Burnt bread did not seem a matter of emotion. And she had not been watching the loaves. She had been outside in the dooryard, staring at the splintery wooden wall of the lean-to, where Yano and his brother-in-law, Seward, kept their cow and its yearling calf. At dusk, yestereve, she thought she had glimpsed an odd mark on that wall. This morning she had looked again, and there it was, faint and slightly glimmering in the early light, half lost in the roughness of the wood, but there all the same. She'd stood squinting at it while the loaves behind her in the kitchen burned. The burntest was her fair portion. It was also bitter and hard as rock. She hid most of it in her apron to give to the birds, and escaped to her morning duty, which was to milk the cow and drive it to pasture in the Highfield. The mark was gone from the shed wall when she hurried outside, lugging the heavy wooden pail by its rope handle, pulling up her hood against the light rain, or else she had forgotten where to look. She stood searching the splintery surface until Anwara came to the doorway to shoo one of her hens out, and spoke to her sharply. Then she made haste into the shed. The calf was loose from its tie and standing spraddle-legged beside its mother, nuzzling her bag. "Here, then, stop it, you great gawk!" cried Saskia, dropping the pail and grabbing the calf around the neck, yanking its head aside. She did not think it had been sucking. It had grown so lanky that it could scarcely stoop low enough to reach the teats, but it had slipped its head yoke, which still hung from the iron bar Yano had fixed to the opposite wall. Leading it there by its ear, Saskia reached for the yoke and stopped in mid-motion. The hook was loose from the ring. "Now then," Saskia muttered to her captive, "if you're not the first beast I ever saw could undo its own tie." The calf bawled and tried to shake free. Saskia tugged it into place and gingerly hooked the chains around its neck. Shivering a little and scrubbing her hands against her skirt to wipe off the smarting sting of the iron, she peered closely at hook and ring. They were sound as ever. This was her cousin's doing. The cow alone was at her task. Its calf was the charge of Morgan and Luna, twin daughters of Yano's sister Ebba and her husband. Seward and Yano had fixed the children's duties the moment the calf was born. "So it's Morgan'll be ticked off, not me," thought Saskia, and went over to milk the cow, catching up the one-legged stool on her way. She settled the wooden pail between her knees and her head in the cow's flank as Anwara had taught her, and reached for the teats. At the first touch she knew she was too late. The calf had suckled after all, or the cow had been milked. How could that be? The stubborn beast was just holding back, trying to cozen me because I'm new at this, thought Saskia, who had learned to milk only a month before. "Give over now, Moll," she said, and tried again, pulling strongly at the teats. But old Moll had something to say to that, swinging her horns and aiming a kick at the pail that spilled the cupful of sauce Saskia had managed to get. Her bag was limp and empty. Nothing to do but go tell Anwara what had happened. So then there was an argle-bargle, sure enough, the kind Saskia hated most, with Anwara wanting to make cheese and no milk to make it, and stalking across to Ebba's house, dragging Saskia with her to confront Morgan and Aluna, and Morgan hotly defending herself, and Aluna wailing, and Ebba saying Saskia had lied, but had likely unhooked the calf herself in the night, just to plague her cousins, as she was always doing. At that point, Anwara squared off for battle, and Saskia slipped away back to the cowshed, leaving the others to shout each other down. Losing Moll's tie, she hurried her past the bawling calf and out of the shed. When they'd finished their bringling, Morgan and Aluna would mind the calf, meanwhile let it bawl. Saskia prodded Moll into an indignant trot that set her empty bag swinging. Up the crooked trail past the last village shed and the old apple orchard, around the fringe of the wood above Moorwater. With the apple trees between her and the village, she allowed the cow to fall back to a walk and go at her own pace up the winding hillside trail to the pasture. The other village cows were there already. Robin and Jenkin, oldest sons of Gwyn the miller, were just coming back through the gap in the stone wall, preparing to replace the peeled log that barred the animals' way. They dropped it and watched as Moll made much ado of stepping over it before ambling along to join her sisters. Ignoring her audience, Saskia wrestled the log into its socket and walked on across the tilted, daisy-strewn pasture, zigzagging elusively among the grazing animals until the two boys had turned downhill and she was alone. Over the wall again, on the far side of the pasture, she pushed between the thickets that edged the foaming, noisy little brook, and jumped into it, shivering with pleasure at the shock of icy water on her bare feet, then waded upstream, beyond the hayfields and the wasteland, past the crumbling remains of the old wall that marked the end of the village land, and onto the moor proper. Here she was at home and comfortable and hard to find, as she knew from other stolen flights. There would be no churning out today anyway, and she could gather the cow's bedding on her way home, perched on a boulder to let the gentle air dry her feet, and dragged the hems of her dress and apron. She pulled in a deep breath of heather and broom, gazing out over the rough, wild terrain of the fields and village below. It was still raining in the valley. She could see the curtain of dark gray blurring the crooked line of roofs beyond the woods, uphill from her rock, where the moor lifted into its high uplands. The sunlight flamed golden in the broom flowers, the only yellow flowers she did not shrink from. Here, between heights and valley, it was something between rain and shine, a pearly May morning. Curling up her boulder, she blinked drowsily at the sky until her eyes closed. A deep-voiced exclamation made them fly open. For an instant she stared into the face of the man gaping down at her. Then she was off the boulder and behind it, peering warily at his astonished scowl, his crook made from a trimmed branch, the long-haired, draggled shapes of the sheep scattered behind him, and the dog tethered to his rope belt by a thong. A shepherd, one she had never seen in the village, yet somewhere she had seen him, and his dog. "Pixie?" the man said, squinting. She stared at him blankly, but her heart had begun to pound. She took a step forward. She took one back. I'm Saskia, the smith's child, she told him. Nay, you're that pixie, he said, edging closer. You'll not diddle me again, you little varmint. I'm on to you. I. He stood still, his scowl fading into a puzzled frown. This time you're bigger. He's addled, she thought, a real Tom Noddy. I'm Yellow's child, she repeated. He's the blacksmith in the village. Ask him yourself. What village? Torskal. Down there, she pointed. Ah, Torskal. I never go there. I'm from over the moor. We'll go there now if you don't believe me. Saskia was backing away, shrilling at him. Ask my dad, he'll tell you. Let me be. She turned and ran as fast as she could go, hoping he wouldn't lose the dog after her. But when she reached the high outcrop and peered back, he was standing where she had left him, scratching under the red felt cap and gazing after her. The dog had lost interest and was gnawing at its flank. She dodged behind the outcrop and climbed on until she was out of his sight. She had never ventured this far before, preferring to keep the village where she could see it, whether she went back before nightfall or not, but she meant to give a wide berth to that rattle-headed shepherd. Pixie! Still, he scared her. She kept thinking she'd seen him before. But no doubt she had seen him before, when she was much smaller, as he'd said. In fact, too young to remember much about it, when she'd been forever running away up the moor. It was nothing at all to be scared of. 6. She was on top of the world now, feeling as tall as a giant with far distance all around. The sun had slipped behind thin clouds and mist drifted around her, touching her with chill fingers. Tightening her cloak strings, she wandered on, stepping warily now, though she did not know why. The ground was stony and rough, covered with coarse long grass like matted hair between the clumps of broom. The grass was different here and there, slightly shining. Glimmering streaks of it swerved around the rocks and between the broom, back and forth like the rutted paths of the sheep made. But these were not sheep paths. Squinting hard to keep one in sight, the glimmer kept vanishing and reappearing up ahead, and careful not to step on it, Saskia followed a slim trail into a hollow, then started scrambling up the steep bank on the other side. She was brought up short by a loud blah, so close that she slipped and gave a squeak of fright. She found herself confronting a large black goat, who had thrust its forequarters over the lip of the hollow to stare down at her enigmatically from its yellow eyes. She stared back. She knew nothing about goats except that they were not like sheep. Get away, you, she ventured. It merely began to chew its cud, seeing its beard waggling and the little bell around its neck tinkling. It didn't move. Well then, stay there. I'll go around, she muttered, glancing down to be sure not to step on the trail she had been following. It had vanished, or she had lost it. She started up the last steep bit, giving the goat a wide berth, only to see another goat appear against the sky beside it and stare down in its turn. This one was white and was smaller. An instant later a grey one shoved up beside the white. It was a flock then, maybe with a rattle-head goat-herd and a dog. She had best turn back. At that moment the goat-herd appeared beside his animals, and it was only a boy not much older than herself, dressed in an odd assortment of rags and tatters. He was dark-haired and gangly, with bright blue eyes and a stubby nose. He didn't look rattle-head. He looked funny and friendly and nice. "Oh, 'twas you, was it?" he said in an interested tone. "I wondered what they was gawking at. Don't be afeard. They won't hurt you. Come along." "Nay, I won't go through your flock. There's only 3 of them. Hey, you! Diddle, get along, all you. Go eat somewhere else." He bounced his stick impartially on 3 bony rumps, and the black goat pushed bossily between the others to lead the way back out of sight. The boy reached his stick down. "Grab a hold. I'll give you a pull." Saskia grabbed, all but flew up the slope with the vigor of his pull, and stumbled forward until he caught her. "Sorry, you don't weigh much, do you? Here, sit down and puff a bit," he invited. She had no need to puff, but she dropped down on one of the low boulders scattered about the moor, and he startled another, tossing aside his stick. They examined each other, he with a curiosity as open and friendly as his face, she without once feeling she must make her hands chubbier and her feet shorter. They exchanged names. His was Tam. "What are the goats' names?" she asked him. The big black and his attendant nannies were browsing on some thorn bushes a little distance away. "Dibble's the black one. The little white is Angel, and the grey's just sister." "Are they yours?" "They're Bruman's, but it's me as looks after 'em, while Warrior looks after Bruman." "A warrior?" "Not a real one, just Bruman's old dog." "Is Bruman your dad?" asked Saskia. "Nay, me dad's dead. Mama too. Bruman's the tinker. We pass this way every year or so. Camp on the moor a while, move on. Maybe you saw us come through our village about a se'night ago? Old two-wheel cart with a raggedy hood, pony and Warrior in front, me and the goats behind." The boy grinned again at himself, it seemed to Saskia. He had good white teeth, with a space between a couple of side ones that lent him a rakish air. She said, "We need no tinker in Torskal. My dad does all the smithing hereabouts." "I know that, so does Bruman. No matter. He can make boots and shoes and saddles and harness and gloves and dagger sheaths and locks and leathern boxes. But who'd hire such skills?" said Saskia, round-eyed. "The only horse in the village was Gwyn the miller's, and it already had a saddle. The oxen worked under wooden yokes. Nobody locked anything. And who wore shoes or boots until snow flew? As for gloves and dagger sheaths and leathern boxes, she'd never heard of such fineries." "I doubt he'll find work in Torskal," she warned. "'Twon't matter to Bruman. He'll find some way to earn a flagon of muxta or strong cider, and he'll worry about nothing till it's empty and he's full." "He'll be drunken?" said Saskia, eyes rounder than ever. "Whenever he can be," Tam shrugged. "Got a lame leg, Bruman has. It pains him bad. He won't talk of it, mostly just takes it out on me and the pony." Tam added cheerfully, "Truth to tell, I'd rather he stayed drunk. But do you have nothing to eat when he is?" "Oh, me and Warrior see to ourselves. The dog's a good ratter. Cotches most of his own meals. In the towns, well, I'm a fair hand at tinkering myself, I know. Had to pick it up, didn't I, to finish his jobs when he's boozing. On the road I can always find a day's work, and there's the goat's milk and hearth bread. Bruman fills a hoggin with barley flour afore we leave each spring, or I don't budge." "Where'd you live in winter time?" "The Kingstown, away by the big river, in the low country." Saskia looked at him with awe, trying to imagine the Kingstown and the big river thrice as wide as the creek, no doubt, and country even lower than the village. She had never travelled farther than the other side of the moor-water. Musing back over their talk, she found a puzzle. "How did you know my dad's the smith?" she demanded. "Well, they said you was the Tam floundered a moment, went red under his tan. "The young one at the smith's house. I saw you the other day in the village. I was filling my water bag at the well. They talk about you, the good wives. Didn't you know it?" She shrugged, but braced herself, knowing well the dropped voices, the nudges, the narrow glances. "Not sure what they say." Tam kicked at a grass tussock, frowning first at it, then toward the goats, which had browsed their way over the next rise, then answered carelessly, "Not much. Only what they say about any young and different from their Rabs and Annies. They say you're eldritch. They say you're freaky odd." He turned back to her, smiling, and she waited. She'd heard that much from the Rabs and Annies themselves. "They say the same of me," he finished blithely. It was something too bad to tell her. But what do I care? They can say what they like," she told herself with a familiar mixture of anger and desolation. The chill mists were swirling around them suddenly, the next thing to rain. She pulled up her hood and rose. "I've all my tasks to do yet," she said. "I'll be going. But maybe soon we'll be climbing up again? Maybe." She smiled to show she bore him no ill will, for a lie meant kindly, and started down the slope, avoiding the steep-sided hollow of the glimmering trail she could no longer see. It might not even be there. He fell in beside her. "I'm here about most days with the goats. I could play me pipes for you." He produced from his ragged tunic a long shepherd's pipe made of a reed, and a shorter one whittled from a willow twig. Or juggle. He stuffed the pipes away, snatched up a handful of pebbles, and sent them flying up in front of him, changing their pattern from circle to up and down to an arc over his head, while Saskia watched, astonished. Whirling about, he caught the pebbles one-handed behind his back, then strolled toward her again with a grin that showed the gap at one side. That's wizardly, she exclaimed, the good wives and their mutterings forgotten. How can you do it? My dad taught me before he died, and I've the long day with the goats to do nothing but practice. If you climb up again tomorrow or so, I'll show you more. I will. She looked back once more to wave at him, where he still stood outlined against the drifting mist, idly tossing the pebbles as he watched her. Then she skipped and danced her way down from the high moor to the tilted wastelands where the bracken grew thickest. With the little wooden-handled knife Yano had made for her, she cut a pile from the fern fronds and tied them with hindweed into a bundle. Worrying it up somehow into a boulder, she backed up to it and hitched it onto her shoulders, slanting it across her back and clinging with both hands to the bindings. Today, with Tam and his goats and his pebbles to think about, she went through the familiar motions without once losing her temper, and with the frond tips jiggling against her ear, went on downhill, past the low field where a few village men were weeding the long, greening strips of winter grain, and along the crooked trail around the apple orchard, just beyond a Dildon's ox stall. She came in sight of the village street, with its scores of stone cottages and sagging sheds scattered higgledy-piggledy along it. Several log ladders leaned against the house walls, for it was the season for pulling the moss off the roofs and repairing thatch, but the men or their sons who should have been on the ladders were instead clustered near the well, their mallets dangling from their hands. With them were a dozen good wives, white-kerchiefed heads huddled together, forearms tucked under their aprons. A few of the younger children played tag around them. An old man Fiak was hobbling toward them with his dog. Something was up. Their murmuring buzzed like a threatened hive. Saskia did not see Anwara's sky-blue shawl among them, but she spotted Ebba and remembered with a disheartened rush the cow, the calf, the morning's wrangle. Now it would all turn out to be her fault. Ebba would make sure of it. Then she saw that the center of the group was a stranger, a man with his back toward her. He was telling some tale that he held the others spell-struck and gaping. Saskia glanced regretfully at the smithy and cottage, just a few steps along the rutted street. She could not reasonably get close enough to hear the story, though doubtless she would hear it on every side tomorrow. Hitching up her heavy load, she picked her way down the street and across it. She was enjoying the feel of the cool, grassy mud under her feet when she realized the buzzing of the voices had ceased. Peering around the fringe of her bracken fronds, she saw the group by the well standing silent, every head turned her way. Even old Fiak's dog was gawking at her. She halted, her throat closing with alarm. What could it have to do with her? Then she saw the storyteller's face. It was the shepherd, the Tom Noddy with his pixie. He'd actually done what she said, and come to ask Yano himself if he had a child. So had he asked Yano? Or just gathered the village to set them gaping with his tomfool tale? Either way, Yano would know how far she'd strayed today. Whirling away, she stomped on to the cowshed, yanked open the door, flung her heavy bundle to the earth floor, and kicked it hard. She stood a moment, flexing her hands, which were sore from clinging to the bindweed. Then she grabbed the wooden rake from where it leaned over the doorway, furiously cleared away Moll's old bedding, and began to spread the new. There's more. I'll go get more. That's weird. That was creepy. Um, it seemed like there were some pieces of debris, like pieces of the loose leaf tea that hadn't fully blended. Um, but the stream just suddenly froze up. So that was kind of creepy. 7. Yano appeared in the shed doorway before she had finished spreading the bracken in Maul's stall. "Leave that," he said. "Come into the room with me." He turned away at once. Saskia hesitated, then dropped the ferns she was holding and reluctantly followed him out of the lean-to and into the cottage. From the dooryard she darted a glance toward the storytelling group. It was scattering, as if every listener had suddenly remembered a task. Beyond them, up the street, she glimpsed Anwara's blue shawl. Yano lifted the latch, ducked under the low door frame, and stepped down heavily into the sunken earth floor, shoving aside one of Anwara's hens that was disputing the way with them. Saskia caught the bird and tossed it outside in a flurry of feathers and wild clucking, then followed Yano and stood warily to meeting his eyes. "Shepherd came to my smithy an hour ago," Yano said without preamble. "Asked me did I have a child so high." He held out a big hand. "'Twas you he saw this morning?" Saskia nodded. Yano studied her a moment, then made a half-embarrassed gesture. "Said he thought 'twas a pixie, when he'd seen afore." "Said it to me too," Saskia mumbled. "He's some kind of Nauticans, is what I thought." "He's cousin to Catilla, young Hungan's wife, up the street here. Name's Mikkel. Never heard he was addled." Yano paused. "Maybe not too bright. You never saw him afore, then?" Saskia swallowed, tried to say never, ended by shrugging. "What's that mean?" "Means I don't know. I might have, when I was little, and kept running off. Can't recollect." "Ah, that could be it," cried Yano, and he sounded oddly relieved. Then he frowned again. "Where was it this morning that he ran into you?" "Well, up above the high field, like. That'll be wasteland, but Torskal land. Our grazing. He lives on the other side of the moor. Never comes our way." "It was on the moor, then," said Saskia unwillingly. "Aye, there 'tis. Now I've told you. Stay on village land. You're ever in mischief. I'll lay odds you is plaguing his sheep." "I wasn't. I fell asleep." "Asleep? In the middle of the moor there? Child, that's daft." "Well, I was sleepy," Saskia thought. However, she knew better than to say it. Yano did not like argufying young ones. Instead, she chewed her lip and looked elsewhere. Yano turned away with an exasperated gesture. Then you listen to me. Stay off the moor, you hear? You got no call to be there. You're never to go there again." Saskia was staring at him now. "Not ever?" she gasped. "Leastways till you're a grown maid and knows what's what. Moor's a wild sort of place. No playground for snipperts like you." "But Dad, please." "That'll do now. No argufying." Yano glanced toward the doorway as Anwara stepped in. "Your mother'll say the same." Anwara pulled off her shawl and hung it on its accustomed peg, asking absently, "The same as what?" Without waiting for an answer, she added, "What was the great foregathering up around the well just now? A body'd think it was a conventicle." "Conventicle of gossiping, same as every day," Yano muttered. His glance at Saskia told her clearly to keep her mouth shut. She was glad to obey. Gossiping about what? They broke up fast enough when they saw me coming. Anwaras was eyeing them both suspiciously. How should I know? I was at my forge. Catilla's cousin Mikkel was around, blethering some tale. Yana waved the subject away. The child here was on the moor again this morning, right among Mikkel's sheep she was, 'cause he saw her there. Now, wife, I told you to stay below the wall and off the moor. From this minute till I say different, you're to tell her the same. His tone was stern enough to divert Anwara's attention from the well gossipers to Saskia, who stood numb and despairing, thinking of Tam and the juggling and the piping, now never to be hers. There was no use hoping Anwara would defend her this time. She had never fretted about the moor, scolded when Saskia ran away there, begged and ordered her to stay below the wall. The moor was wild and dangerous. Some said there were wolves. Everyone knew there were treacherous bogs, tales of plenty of grown men wandering off the trails and losing their way, breaking a leg in some mishap, and dying helpless of pain and starvation, and other darker tales of bogles and hobgoblins, of moorfolk's mischief, and the fool's fire that led you where it willed. It sounded nothing like Saskia's beloved moor, which for her was wide with freedom and unshadowed by fear, but Yano meant what he said this time. He and Alwara changed the list of their duties in the shape of her day. Before they were finished, she was all but house tethered. It was all that rattle-head shepherd's doing, Saskia thought bitterly. Yana was afeard of his tongue. That was the long and short of it. Her vexations were not over. Ill luck came in threes, everyone said, and the third blow fell a few mornings later. She went out to the shed to milk and again found Moll's bag empty. Someone or something had once more got there ahead of her. This time no one could blame the calf, which was now stalled in Seward's ox shed across the road. They would blame Saskia. She knew it well. She stood a moment, baffled and angry, just outside the shed door, telling herself to go on, go back home and get it over with, but dreading to face Anwara and start the village tongues wagging once again. Suddenly she turned to scan the rough wooden wall beside her, remembering the strange marks she had seen there, or almost seen, that other morning this had happened. And there it was again. It seemed clearer this time, fresher. There were 3 straggling lines crossed by another, all contained within a mark curved like a cupped hand. She stared at it until it wavered and vanished, then put down her empty bucket, found a twig, and tried to scratch the pattern in the dirt. It was oddly hard to copy. She was on her 3rd attempt when a shadow fell across her hand, and she felt old Bess leaning over her, watching. Quickly she straightened up, scrubbed at her scratchings with a bare foot. Nay, child, don't rub them out. Let me see. Old Bess put out a restraining hand, but she did not sound angry. What is that mark? She asked. I don't know, I saw it. Saskia's glance went to the shed wall, and old Bess swallowed it. The mark was there again, slightly glimmering, then partly gone. Do you see? Said Saskia. It comes and goes like that. Old Bess gazed silently at the wall, then at Saskia. I see nothing, she said. But Saskia went to the wall, stood on tiptoe to put one finger on the mark itself. Just there. I don't doubt you, child, said old Bess slowly, but I can't see it. For a moment their eyes met. Saskia's puzzled, old Bess's speculative. Draw it again. On the ground there, said the woman. Saskia tried her best. It was not the same, but close enough. What is it? She asked. I saw it the other time, too. What other time? There, now I've gone and let it out, thought Saskia, bracing herself for a tongue lashing. She drew a long breath. The other time Moll was milked before I got here. I see. Old Bess did not really seem surprised. So that's happened again today? Saskia nodded and waited, uncertain which was coming, an expected scolding and totally unexpected support. Old Bess said quietly, The mark is a rune. I think it's a sign meaning a cow may be milked here, and the thief will go blameless because the blame will fall on someone else. Saskia could feel her eyes stretching wider and wider. The word rune was echoing and re-echoing in her mind, filling all its spaces. It was several moments before she grasped the rest of the remark. Somebody wants me blamed? She faltered. Maybe not that exactly, just there is safety for the thief if you are. Saskia barely heard the answer. What is a rune? She asked urgently. A kind of writing. I think I know some other ones, whispered Saskia, rather frightening herself. Or once did, she added confusedly. I dare say 'twas a dream. Could you draw one of the others? I could not, Saskia said quickly, unwilling to try or even ask herself why she was unwilling. She cast about hurriedly for some safe subject. Old Bess supplied it. Suppose we wash this mark off the wall. If you guide my hand, I will do the washing. Will we tell my mother? Whispered Saskia. Old Bess smiled briefly. We will tell Anwara the cow was milked, but I will come with you to tell her. The washing we will do later, when she has gone to the low field to weed her peas. So it happened. Saskia did not know why it was so much easier to break the ill news with old Bess standing calm and silent behind her, but it was. It even seemed easier for Anwara to take the blow, or else she was too dismayed to rage. She merely stood by the table and heard Saskia out, her hands motionless in the bread dough, her thin shoulders drooping. Then she sighed deeply, wiped her hands, and went to poke up the fire. Put away the churn, then, she said harshly. You will bake the loaves this morning while I'm at my weeding. Don't let them burn. I won't, Mamma, Saskia murmured, and that was the end of it. Later, when Anwara had gone to the low field and the loaves were cooling, old Bess came back carrying a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Fetch a bowl and put a little water in it, she told Saskia. And a pinch of salt, she added when the bowl was ready. Saskia hesitated, then found a spoon to dip the salt out of its wooden box. Salt had always stung her fingers. Now come along, said old Bess. Saskia obeyed, carefully balancing the bowl and eyeing the little bundle still tucked under old Bess's arm. Except for old man Fiac and his dog, both dozing in the dooryard, the street was empty. From the smithy just beyond the cowshed to the clang of Jano's hammer sounded rhythmically on the still sun-warmed air. Old Bess walked straight to the shed wall, stooped down, and opened her bundle on the ground. It was full of the leaves and stems and yellow flowers of St. John's wort. Saskia skipped hastily back, slopping the water a little. It will not hurt you, Saskia, old Bess said calmly. You need not even touch it. Just give me the bowl, then guide my hand to the mark. She took a handful of the plant trimmings, dipped them in the salt water, and waited. Gingerly, Saskia took hold of her wrist, located the half-visible rune on the wall, and placed the hand with its dripping leaves over the center. Old Bess scrubbed this way, that way, over the whole area. After a few moments, she paused. Is it gone? Nearly, Saskia told her. A bit toward that edge, she pointed, holding her finger just off the wood. Old Bess dripped a fresh hand of leaves and flowers and scrubbed again. This time nothing was left. Saskia met old Bess's questioning glance and nodded. Why can I see it and you cannot? She wanted to ask, but kept silent, fearing that she might not want the answer. Then pour out the water and take the bowl back to its shelf. Our little task is done. Old Bess bundled up the crushed trimmings and tied the cloth. She smiled her tight, brief smile at Saskia. If you dream some other rune, will you come and show me? I will, Saskia murmured. Good. Now I'll just have a word with your dad. She turned and headed for the smithy. A word with Jano? What about? Uneasy again, Saskia watched from the cottage dooryard until Bess disappeared under the wide smithy roof and Jano's clanging broke off. Then she darted closer, ducking behind the tall clump of gray and gold mullein that grew by the smithy wall. Jano's deep voice rumbled. Old Bess's answer floated out clearly. Nay, I was but passing and puzzling about your cow. I wonder, Jano, that you do not hang a horseshoe over the door of that shed. More rumbling with a questioning lift at the end. Well, old Bess's voice had shrug in it. It is said to turn away bad luck. Tell Anwara I will bring her some melilot tomorrow to flavor her cheese. Old Bess emerged from the smithy and went her way up the street. Saskia watched from behind the mullein clump, forgetting to move because of consternation about the horseshoe. Would Jano do that? Nail iron right over the door she had to go in and out of twice a day? Iron made her shiver, made her teeth ache, and hurt her if she touched it. Jano knew it did. They all knew. Old Bess had just begun to seem so friendly, now this. There was no puzzling her out. The clanging from the smithy started up again, but at a jerky pace, and suddenly there was the clatter of Jano's hammer landing amid his other tools. Belatedly, Saskia came to her senses and scampered home. She was barely inside when Jano stalked past. A moment later the hammer blows sounded again, not ringing as they did against the anvil, but with a sombre thunk, 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 as the horseshoe was nailed above the cow-byre door. I'll be right back. I don't know why, but it appears to be laggy right now. Really laggy. 8. After the horseshoe went up, there was no further trouble about the milking, and for a while there was no other nuisance to blame Saskia for. True, she had forced herself into the shed each morning and evening, shivering as she passed under the horseshoe, but this bothered no one but her. A far larger burden was the unused energy now bottled up inside her. Forbidden the moor in her free wanderings, she attacked the churning with a vigor that sloshed the milk out of the tall wooden churn, swept the smooth tramped earth floor so hard she raised dust where there had once been more loose before. She had a rough hand with the bread dough and washed crocks hard enough to crack them. Since she balked at scouring the iron pot, braving the horseshoe twice a day was bad enough. She was put to scrubbing the hearthstones and the table, and Yano's other tunic until he complained that she had well nigh worn it out. All this took up only part of her morning. "It'll never answer," old Bess had told Anwara at the outset. "You may cage her, but she'll slip out through the bars, or beat herself senseless against them." "Mother, what blather! Any child needs to learn to mind a house, and do the tasks. This child needs freedom. She needs the moor." "The moor? Why, you know as well as I." With an indignant cluck, Anwara dismissed the matter. "Doesn't she go daily to gather wood? That's roaming a-plenty. When the sheep shearing's done next week, I'll put her to washing my fleeces." Saskia vigorously washed the fleeces, but she was too rough when it came to carding them, far too impatient to spin. Her thread turned out full of lumps and skinny spots, and could not be given to Oleg the weaver. Under Anwara's stern eye, Saskia knitted it into a rather lumpy shawl for herself. When that was done, the idleness set in again. It was not in her to sit still, or even to dawdle over tasks to make them last longer. Sometimes she slipped outside and ran around and around the cottage, still obediently at home, but at least moving, skipping, and leaping. Sometimes she simply jumped up and down in the middle of the room until she collapsed into a breathless heap. Once she climbed up onto the thatch without a ladder and spent a satisfying hour scrambling about, pulling tufts of wild grass off the reeds until Anwara came back from the low field and screeched with fright to see where she was, then screeched at Yano for not keeping his eye open. Whereupon Yano bellowed that he was a smith, not a nanny, and Anwara would henceforth take that plaguy young one along to help with the weeding and watch for herself. But there was a proper and time-honored way to weed the grain. One used a hooked stick to separate the weed from the grain stems, a forked stick to pin it down, and the hooked one again to uproot it, as one moved step by step along the row, leaving as mulch as well as a path for the reaper to follow. Saskia was not tall enough to use the weeding sticks. She went back to the cottage. Meanwhile, May was passing, and the moor was dressing itself in wildflowers, and Tam was far away on top of the world, no doubt, fluting and juggling all by himself. One day Saskia tied all the clothes and bedclothes in the house together just to be doing something. The next she plucked the tail feathers out of Anwara's hens and stuck them in her hair until she looked like a new and astonishing kind of bird. Forbidden such games in Yano's most exasperated roar, she fell at last into a silent, dark dejection that began to bother her parents as much as her mischief did. "Now what ails her?" Yano demanded of Anwara one morning, grouchy with worry. Dose her with valerian, can't you? Or coltsville about dosing young ones? Well, do something. Ask your mother then. It may be she'll know a cure." But Anwara did not care to ask old Bess and be told again that Saskia needed her freedom and the more. Instead, she asked Saskia if a tooth hurt, or her stomach felt queasy, and got a blank look and an indifferent shake of the head in reply. Saskia scarcely heard Anwara's edgy questions. She had finally begun to ask herself what was wrong with her, why she was so different from everybody else, and what would be the end of it. She found no answer, but the question weighed on her. For all she knew, answering it would be the worse than all the rest. And then one day, alone in the house with her tasks done, She climbed up to swing by her knees from a rafter to see how the room looked upside down, and noticed the door to the put-away cupboard where Anwara showed everybody's winter coats and beechwood clogs when the snows were over. It was a small cupboard tucked under the straw-fringed eaves in the dim corner of the storage loft, and easy to forget about. But Anwara had been known to bring down a pot of honey she had laid by there, and Saskia decided to explore it. She had got right side up on the rafter, and scampered along it until she could drop onto the loft and edge her way between the baskets holding straw rope and torch reeds and spare sheepskins for winter bedding, a broken-legged stool, Anwara's soap-making cauldron. No doubt there would be only more such oddments in the cupboard, but Saskia meant to find out. Crouched on the rough boards in front of it and brushing spiderwebs away from her face, she fumbled gingerly with the latch, using a handful of her apron to protect her fingers as she tugged the iron pin out. At last the hasp grated free of its staple, and the cupboard door creaked open. Sucking her fingers, which tingled in spite of the apron, Saskia peered inside. A linen sack, beeswaxed at the seams, turned out to be half full of the goose down Anwara was storing for new pillows. Behind it, a stiffened sheep-hide pouch held nothing but a broken knife. There were the winter togs, a pot of red earth for Anwara's dyes, no honeycocks, though. In fact, nothing else except, far back in the gloom, a dim bundle of something wrapped carefully in sheepskin, fleece-side in. Saskia stretched an arm to its longest, tugged the bundle into reach, and began to lay back on its coverings, sneezing from the dust. Inside the fleece was another kind of sheep-hide pouch, empty and flat, but feeling still supple under an exploring finger, and on top of it, indeed, attached to it, she could see now, were several long, thin, gangly, jointed, black, nickel-trimmed, ivory-capped, tubular, tasselled. It was a set of bagpipes. Joy swept like a gale through Saskia. Breathless and bubble-light, she pounced on the pipes and scrambled backwards along the loft, dragging them with her, heedless of the baskets she upset or the clatter she made. Perched like a bird on the rafter again, with feet braced wide, she located the blowpipe and puffed vigorously into it until her eyes felt crossed, with little effect on the bag which hung at her side, still maddeningly slim and sleeping, though not quite flat. She rested a moment, then drew in a prodigious breath and blew again, at the same time giving the bag a clout that helped it awake and swell, and drew the first startled sob from the drones. Tucking the inflated bag firmly under her arm and blowing steadily, she swung 3 drones over her shoulder. Her hands found the chanter and her fingers the holes along its sides with only a little fumbling, and settled into a position they already knew. Then the shrill, shrieking cry of the chanter shattered the quiet of the afternoon, running up and down and around the scale in a wild little air, soon accompanied, as drones warmed up, by 3 voiced groaning, high and low, on a single sonorous note. The tune had not ended before it swerved into another, more frenzied and clamorous than the first, which rollicked and frolicked around the little house, and out over the village with a noise to wake the dead. Janos was the first shocked face to appear in the doorway. He stared frantically around, then up. Stumbling into the room, he stood motionless, his wide, disbelieving gaze fixed on the rafter. At his heels, several children crowded into the open door. Behind them, old Fiak blinked. Helsa, the wife of Alun, craned and hopped, trying to see around Fiak. Saskia paid no heed, only finished her rigadoon to start a pibroch of high, piercing sweetness that had her listeners clutching their ears in pain. It was one thing to hear bagpipes wailing and groaning across the moor and the confines of a little room. It was quite another. Yano regained his power of speech. "Come down from there! Stop that! And come down!" he roared, but could not be heard over the racket. Several more faces appeared at the doorway, and 1 or 2 peered through the tiny window. Saskia was ending her pibroch when the cluster of villagers shifted in confusion, then parted to admit Anwara, and after her, old Bess. Anwara hurried across the room toward Yano, and like him, froze, staring up at the rafter. Old Bess took one long, astonished, comprehending look, then began firmly herding the gaping visitors out of the cottage. She latched the door and placed her own tall person in front of the window as Saskia, giddy with excitement, began an ear-splitting fanfare. When it was finished, she paused for breath. The silence was almost as stunning as the noise had been. The first to recover, Yano gasped, "Come down, you imp!" His voice shook, and he paused to swallow. "Put those pipes back, do you hear me? And come down from there." The glorious, wondrous, joyful afternoon shattered around Saskia. She focused at last on his outraged face, glimpsed Anwara's dazed one beside him, and realized there was going to be another argle-burgle. Maybe the worst yet, because she knew already she was not going to obey. She did not move except to tighten her clutch on the pipes. The silence rang in her ears. Into it Anwara spoke, her eyes dark with a bewilderment that, like Yano's, seemed close to fright. "Child, how in God's earth did you learn to play the pipes?" Relaxing a bit with her own surprise, Saskia transferred her gaze to Anwara. She could not comprehend the question. "Learn?" she repeated. "Aye, learn. It's plain enough you have learned, somehow or other. Who hasn't taught you?" Saskia could only shake her head in confusion and growing anxiety. Again she had done something that seemed to her perfectly natural, but to others strange. "Nobody taught me. But you were playing them. No use denying that. I was. They were made for playing. Can you not play them yourself?" Saskia ventured. "Aye," Anwara laughed sharply. "No more than I can breathe under water, and it's the same for your dad." "But the pipes were here, in the put-away cupboard just yonder." Saskia let go the chanter long enough to point an exasperated finger. Were there pipes, there was surely someone to play them. Anything else was witless. Yano spoke heavily. "The pipes were my dad's. He was a champion piper, he was. But I'll have no young one fidgeting about with my dad's pipes, and maybe leaving them out in the wet, or—" "I never did so," Saskia exclaimed. "None the less," said Yano, overriding her, "you'll put 'em back now where they belong and climb down from there." Saskia only folded her arms together about the pipes. This time she was not going to be scared, and she was not going to be obedient. She was going to stay on this rafter until she starved and fell off it, rather than put the pipes back in that cupboard. They did not belong there. They belonged here, in her hands, under her arm, pressing into her left shoulder, and here they would stay. "Saskia!" roared Yano. Anwara spoke up. "Hold your peace, husband. She's not hurting the pipes. Did you not hear how she can play? And without teaching." She hesitated, then declared, "'Tis a gift from God." "Or from the devil," Yano retorted. "Blather," retorted Anwara, a little too swiftly. Their eyes held a moment, then she turned away. Wearily she added, "Let the child have them. It's the first time I've seen her smile in a fortnight." "She'll make more mischief," Yano protested. Old Bess spoke suddenly from her post near the window. "More likely the pipes will keep her from it. Come, Yano, of what use to anyone are they in that cupboard?" Outnumbered and beginning to be out-argued, Yano clutched at a final straw. "But they're my dad's own pipes." "Aye, but your dad can't play them, can he?" Anwara flung at him. "He's gone to his reward. That's if the good Lord saw fit to reward him for a life spent 3/4 drunken, and you can't play a penny whistle. So let be. Stick your anvil and leave the child her tunes." "Ah, well and all," Yano growled, glaring from one to another of them like a thwarted bear. "What's a man to do with the 3 of you females, all agin him? I wash my hands of it." He stalked to the door and slammed out of it, still muttering. Saskia, hugging her precious bagpipes and feeling her whole face lift and crease in a grin of triumph, was conscious of an odd and new emotion as she fixed her gaze on Anwara. It was joy, but it was more. She was still trying to name it, to fathom it, when Anwara walked forward and reached up, saying, "Hand me the pipes, then come down from there. You'll be the death of me with your antics. What if you'd fallen?" "I won't fall, Mamma," said Saskia, but she climbed down at once, brushing the dust from her petticoats without anyone telling her, then stood searching Anwara's face, still trying to puzzle out the new feeling. She wished Anwara would give her a fiercely hard task to do, or walk into terrible danger so she could rush to the rescue. She felt a strong need to repay. But Anwara merely handed her the pipes, said, "Find a safe place to keep them, and mind you don't neglect your tasks to sit playing all day long." "I won't, I vow I won't," said Saskia fervently, and at that moment she meant every word. "9. But it was one thing to promise, another to keep faith, and when the bagpipes always tempting her to neglect her tasks or hurry through them, skimble scamble, just to be done and free to make tunes, she kept the pipes in the truckle bed woven of straw rope that she had slept in as an infant, pushed under the low cot she slept in now, and out of sight. But they were in her mind's eye all the time, and the tunes ran through her head, pushing and joggling to get out. She could seldom resist dropping her work to fetch out the pipes, fill the bag, and give them voice. Of all who heard them, and not one of the 87 men, women, children, and infants in the village could avoid hearing them, including old Fiach, when he was half deaf. Only Jano's sister Ebba thought to ask a simple question: "What tunes are those?" Nobody could answer it. Everybody began to talk about it. Nobody had ever heard those tunes. Before there was nothing like the old traditional ones that everyone grew up knowing, the ones Janos da had used to play. So where had Saskia learned them? Ebba's question became the focus of the gossip around the village well. Helsa, the wife of Alun, put it to Anwara, who stared at her a moment and said, "Likely she makes them up." Nobody believed that. Inevitably someone brought up the Elf King's tune, said to be music so strange, so wild and compelling, that even the trees and stones were forced to dance. But nobody had seen any trees or stones kicking up their heels. They backed off a bit, turning it over in their minds as they filled their buckets. All the same, Ebba summed it up as they prepared to part. No young one could have made such tunes up out of her head. There's something about 'em not rightly ooman. That's what I say. And what I've been saying these 10 years, put in Helsa, with her eyebrows raised and her smile thin. She lowered her voice. The others leaned toward her in a huddle of head kerchiefs. A changeling she is, or I've never eat peas porridge. And what'll come of it if we don't do something, I hate to say. But what can we do? Whispered young Catilla, rather timidly, into a silence. Nobody cared to answer. At that moment the peace of the afternoon, filled only with the bees' humming and the medley of birdsong, was broken by the all too familiar initial choking sob of the drones. The birds fell silent as one of the weirder, wilder tunes rose out of the smith's cottage and filled the street. It was soon accompanied by the wails of the village infants, rudely wakened from the afternoon naps, as well as the howling of old Fiac's dog. "One thing we can do is get shut of that racket and ruction," said Ebba in her normal, loud and angry voice. "I say, send that creature back up to the moor she liked so well. I doubt there's any danger for one like her. And if there is," Helsa slid in, "then so be it. There will be nothing left for us to do." Heads nodded thoughtfully, then firmly. Catilla ventured, "But who will tell Anwara?" "I'll tell Yano," Ebba snapped, picking up her buckets. "It'll be a fine day when I'm afeard of my own brother." As she and everyone knew, it would be an even finer one when Yano heeded much she said. But by this time Yano was as tired of his decree that Saskia should bide in the cottage as he was flummoxed by how to reverse himself. Out-argued in a matter of Daz bagpipes, he could not bring himself to back down on another matter too. Then something else happened. One mid-morning, when everybody was busy with the flocks or fields or indoor tasks, old Fergil the fisherman walked down the deserted village street to the smithy. Yano blinked a moment before he recognized the hulking, stooped figure silhouetted against the brightness of the wide doorway. Rarely did Fergil leave his lonely hut among the dunes between Moorwater and the sea to venture near his fellow creatures, only when need drove him to replace his much-patched boots or a supply of fish-hooks and eel-traps did he come to the village, and then when it was all but empty. "So, Virgil," said Yano, putting aside the iron rim he was fitting to the wooden blade or a spade. "Hooks, is it? Or did one of the traps I made you break?" Virgil shook his shaggy head as he stepped into the shade of the smithy. "Trap's good," he muttered. His voice was rusty with disuse. "I make them to last," remarked Yano. "Then 'tis hooks you're after. What size are you needing? Handful of little ones." 10 or so big uns for the one-eyes and the salmon. That'll be more than a moment's work, man. I've this spade and another to finish, and both Eldeden's oxen to shoe afore I can get to it even. Call it a sennight." "Aye, well," Virgil shifted his feet a bit. "Can you bring 'em?" "What, bring 'em clean down where the other side of the Moorwater? Virgil, come fetch 'em. I'm a busy man, friend." "Can't rightly get away," Virgil mumbled, beginning to edge toward the door and dart suspicious glances into the shadows behind the forge. "Can't but won't," thought Yano, irritation struggling as usual with pity for the strange old fellow. Sighing, he was about to give in as he always did with Virgil when it occurred to him that Saskia was old enough by now to send on errands. "Aye, well then," he began. The rest was lost in the sudden cough and moan of the drone starting up next door, followed by the chanter's cry soaring wild into the morning. Virgil's eyes opened wide and rolled toward the wall separating the cottage and the smithy. He stumbled back and seemed about to bolt. Yano shouted a reassurance. Before he could finish, the fisherman suddenly went as still as stone-carved image of himself, his gaze fixed intently on the wall. The sounds coming through it had now resolved themselves into one of Saskia's piercing, curious little tunes. Virgil moved not a muscle until it ended. Then he whispered hoarsely, "Who plays those pipes?" "No, but my daughter," Yano told him, trying to brush the subject away. "A child only. She knows no proper tunes." Virgil gave him a strange, long look. "That's never a child of yours, Yano. Never, no." "What are you saying, man?" growled Yano, forced almost to roar it because another tune had started from beyond the wall. "That's no child playing, no. No." Virgil could barely be heard, but his head was shaking back and forth, his eyes glassy, his meaning plain. "Come then, I'll show you," cried Yano, keeping his wary eye on the man as he grasped his arm to urge him out of the smithy. Virgil was such an odd one, nobody knew what he might do. However, he did nothing but allow himself to be guided outside and around the cottage dooryard. Yano threw open the door and gestured. There was Saskia perched on a rafter, piping, while below her Anwara set the loaves to the fire. Virgil stood, wooden, staring at Saskia, unheeding when Anwara arose from the hearth with a quick glance at Yano and said good day. Yano demanded, "Will you believe now?" But Virgil was deaf to him too. Only when Saskia abruptly broke off her tune and met his fixed look with a curious one did Virgil edge backward past Yano. He was still wooden-faced, but shaking in every limb. "Can't you see it's no but my little one?" Yano asked, exasperated because Virgil was making him acutely uneasy. The more he stared. "No," muttered Virgil. "No, no, no. No, no." He whirled suddenly and made off down the street, never showing nor glancing to right or left until he plunged into the woods and out of sight. "Poor old lack-brain," Anwar muttered to Yano as they stood together in the doorway. "What ails him now?" Her voice was casual, but she was tensely searching his face. Yano shrugged his big shoulders as if he would shrug the whole morning off, the whole week, maybe the whole past uneasy 11 years. It often struck him that life had been sadder but simpler, childless. "Likely vexed by the sound of pipes," he growled. "Or may chance it's the plaguey tunes she plays on him. Where in the name of old Jude Clutie does she get them, anyway?" "She makes 'em up," said Anwara sharply, crossing herself at the mention of the devil. "Don't you, child," she added as she turned back into the house, Saskia still blinking over the odd behavior of the stranger, and hoping it had nothing to do with her, barely heard the question until Anwar repeated it insistently. "You make the tunes up, don't you? Out of your own head?" For an impatient moment Saskia focused on the matter. It seemed to her that she had always known those tunes, but maybe she had made them up. "I don't know. Who was that man?" she asked Anwara. "Oh, nobody." Anwara abruptly busied herself with a water bucket. "Just old Virgil the fisherman. Come down now. I want you to mind the loaves." He stared at me. Well, he's a bit touched, poor man. Some say he was hexed long ago. Come you down. I must go to the well. And put away those pipes." Reluctantly Saskia descended, tucked the bagpipes into their trundle bed, and settled herself beside the hearth as Anwara picked up the bucket, plucked her blue shawl from its peg, and hastily left the house. "Doesn't want to talk about that man," Saskia thought, looking after her, and grew more curious than before. Yano had already gone back to his anvil and the spade rim, on which he was venting some of the baffled spleen with ringing hammer blows. It was now plain to him. The child and his piping had got out of the village and as far out of earshot as he could manage before he harmed her or his dad's pipes, one or the other, but he could not back down about the moor. The next noonday he had worked out a face-saving compromise. Nowadays the cows were pastured in the wasteland above the high fields to let the grass in the lower meadows grow for hay. He thought about this, and when Anwara came as usual to bring him his ale, complaining about the bagpipes caterwauling in her ears half the day, he was ready for her. "No, you're not to worry your poor aching head about it, wife. We'll see to everything," he told her expansively. "We'll strike a bargain with the child, that's what we'll do," he said, as if he had only just thought of it, instead of tossing and fretting half the night. "She'll take the cow each day up to the summer pasture, do her piping there, and only there. 'Tisn't the moor, but it's next to nigh it, and she won't make the babies from that far off. She won't wake the babies from that far off." So the following day Saskia was abruptly freed from her tether, to her delight and everybody else's profound relief. She did not ask what brought about the change, but as she followed Moll up the winding hillside trail by the apple orchard, the first pearly morning, she was thinking Anwara must have had a hand in it, maybe old Bess too, as it was they she had to thank for the pipes themselves. Again she felt the new strong urge to reciprocate, to give back joy for joy. "10. It was easy to know what would please old Bess. There were herbs growing in the wasteland that did not thrive lower down, and strong though she was for her years, old Bess made this climb only when she had to. Saskia kept her eyes open as she went, noting a clump of this and patch of that, and when Moll was settled to her browsing and bagpipes warmed up enough to send their first wild, satisfying strains across the hillside, she walked and piped, still searching with her eyes among the rocks and heather clumps for plants she did not see near the village. The pipes sounded fine up here in the high misty morning, much finer than in the cottage, where every note rebounded off the enclosing walls and jarred against every other. It was halfway to noon before she finally blew herself out and was ready to go home. Then she picked samplings of everything she had spotted, including a fistful of red and white daisies for Anwara, tied the herbs in her apron, and danced her way down. Her tasks awaited her, along with a few sharp questions from Anwara to make sure she had not slipped away to the dangerous moor. "I stayed near the cows, Mamma," Saskia assured her, holding out the little bunch of daisies as a peace offering, though now she thought of it, she had never seen flowers in the cottage and wondered belatedly if she'd broken a rule. Anwara herself seemed uncertain how to react. She stared at the slightly wilting daisies and said, "Posies, is it? I always thought them better left to grow." She glanced at Saskia and added, "Well a day, you meant it kindly. Dip some water into that mug with the broken handle. They'll maybe last the day. Then put away those pipes and get to your churning. The morning's near gone." Saskia did as was bid. Clearly, daisies were not the proper thank you for Anwara. She would have to think of something else. It was otherwise with old Bess's gift. When she had washed the butter and put away the churn, Saskia scampered up the grassy street with her bundle of wasteland herbs to the little hut at the far end. It was the last house in the village, set apart from Oleg the Weaver's by a thicket of hawthorn, blooming white now and scenting the sunny midday air. Beyond old Bess's thatch, the street meandered off as a narrow track, winding upward across a part of the moor Saskia had not explored, and eventually toward the town. She stood a moment, gazing, wondering where Tam and his goats were now, before she stepped onto the flagstone doorstep and knocked. "Come in, Saskia," called old Bess as calmly as she could see straight through the door. Saskia obeyed, only briefly surprised. Old Bess knew all sorts of things, and never said how she knew them. This day, however, she had not guessed Saskia's errand. "Well, child, have you remembered another rune to show me?" Saskia hesitated. She had seen several since that one day in the cow byre. Some mystifying, others suddenly familiar, their meaning plain as a shout, though how or when she had learned it she could not guess. There was one on the mill's great wheel that meant danger, another on Farron and Guthwick's root cellar. Near a loose board Guthwick let go unmended meant something like "help yourself." Another she knew glimmered on the door-post she had just slipped past. However, for answer she merely handed old Bess her bundled-up apron. "What's this? Bless me! Lady's mantle, and heart's ease, costmary, coltsfoot. Where did you find that, child? It's the best ever for my cough, and true chamomile. That will ease old Fiac's aching knee." She knew every leaf and sprig Saskia had brought, knew their uses. Setting Saskia to plucking the yellow and white flowers off the spidery chamomile, she tried the rest of the herbs in bunches to join the others hanging from the rafters to dry. Her single room was like a strange, shadowy little bower, aromatic with a mixture of pungent smells, and a shelf near the scoured wooden table held 4 large mysterious books that had belonged to Brother Oswick and the wandering monk who had once lived here. They were unlike anything Saskia had ever seen. Much in old Bess's cottage was unlike anybody else's. She was half scared of the place, wholly fascinated. But it was only since the day old Bess had helped her scrub the rune marks from the cowshed door that she had ventured to come here on her own. While old Bess spread the chamomile blossoms on a net to hang like an airy hammock above the hearth, Saskia edged closer to the books, trying to imagine what secrets they held and how one found out. They were mostly secrets about herbs, old Bess had told her, set down by Brother Oswick, and added by old Bess herself on the pages he had left blank. Old Bess, as usual, read her thoughts. "Would you like to see my books?" She lifted one down, untied its thongs that bound the boards, and spread the book open on the table. The time-spotted vellum pages were covered with thin scratchings which meant as little to Saskia as those on Wara's hens made in the dust, but here and there in the corner of the page was a little brownish drawing of a leaf, a flower, a whole plant, looking as natural as growing in the woods. "Silverweed," said Saskia in surprise, putting a finger in one of them. "Yes, Brother Oswic's hand was gifted," old Bess told her. "All his wisdom is in here, on these pages." As Saskia touched the marks, she went on, "Writing makes pictures in the mind, like runes. He taught me to read the letters. Here, look. This says silverweed eases fever. A pinch of the herb, pour boiling water over, strain through a cloth, drink a cupful each day." Saskia stared, astonished, at the marks. Runes meant only such simple things as keep away or here it is safe. Real writing was magic. "Could I learn to read them?" she asked. "You could, in time," old Bess hesitated, glancing at Saskia thoughtfully. "It may be you could learn quicker than I did." "I could? Why?" Old Bess hesitated even longer. Saskia could not imagine what she was thinking, but it made her sky-blue eyes go darker and grayer, as if they had clouded over, and in the end she decided not to say it. Instead, she took a breath, beckoned Saskia close to her, and pointed at one mark in the book. "Look, that is a letter, and its name is A. Trace it for me with your finger there on the table." Saskia did so. Old Bess smiled a little and said, "Aye, so I thought. Fetch me that piece of slate yonder on the shelf. You'll find a lump of redstone in the cup beside it." An hour later, when old Bess rose and took her shawl from its peg and her root basket from the hearth, the slate was scrawled with red marks, and Saskia knew her letters. Old Bess told her so. "I can read now?" she asked eagerly. "No, you have learned 26 letters. You have yet to learn even one word of the many they can make. Come tomorrow and we will make some words." Saskia watched her return the book to the shelf. She did not want to stop or leave the big books without knowing what was in them. Are Brother Oswic's secrets all about curing people? No, he knew many other things as well. She glanced at Saskia. He knew some of the runes. Startled, Saskia met her eyes. He could see them like me? That I would not be the only one, she was thinking, with a relief tinged with a faint, curious sense of loss. The runes, even the mention of them, always made her feel two ways at once. "He could not, no more than I," old Bess said calmly. "Then how? He would never tell me how he learned about them, or who taught him what they meant." Saskia slowly tied on her crumpled apron, studying old Bess's unreadable face, feeling the secret strong tug of attraction mixed with wariness that runes and certain bird songs and those faint, curious streaks on the moor always roused in her. "But he taught you?" "Well, a day he taught me what he knew. But I learned more from the gypsies." Saskia stared in astonishment. "Gypsies? The one who passed this way each year?" "Very like them. A different band. They brought me to this village long ago." "You are a gypsy?" Old Bess smiled and shook her head. She set her shawl and root basket aside and sat down again, pulling Saskia down beside her on the hearth bench. "No, child, only a foundling. The gypsies came across me at a crossroads somewhere in the south country, a newborn lying in a seed basket. They thought at first I was no but a bit of sheepskin. They saw different and near drowned me on some outcast from a pixie's nest, or so my good Milligran used to tell me, when she would tell me anything about it. She took me in, I never knew why, and raised me with her other young ones till I was near your age. And when finally the band roamed northward, they left me in Torskal in the dead of one midnight, asleep in my truckle bed outside the miller's gate, with the same sheepskin over me and the seed basket beside me. When dawn came, Gwen, the miller's gradna, who was miller then, found me there, but my gypsies were long gone." "Why? Why did they leave you?" Saskia whispered. Her eyes felt wide enough to pop from her head. "Why did they leave the sheepskin in the basket?" Old Bess shrugged. "The sheepskin was like those of the sheep you see hereabouts, shaggy and long-haired, not a mat of curls like a Southland sheep. And the basket was like any Toscal man uses when he sows his fields. Perhaps they thought I belonged here. Do you think so? Saskia asked softly. I have sometimes wondered if I belong anywhere, old Bess told her. After a moment tangled with feelings she could not name, Saskia whispered, I too. Leastwise, if I do, I think it is not Torskal. Yet how can that be when I have never been anywhere else? She asked herself, or meant to, but realized she had spoken aloud, asking old Bess too. She stared earnestly into the woman's weathered face, hoping, half expecting to find the answer, but she could no more read it there than she could so far read the secrets in the books. Abruptly old Bess rose, reaching for her shawl. Well, Gwyn the miller's granda took me in. I was raised with his brood and married his eldest, who died of a pox when Onwara was half grown. By then old brother Oswick had settled in this house, and I came each day and swept and cooked for him, and learned from him until he died. When Onwara wed, I moved out of the miller's house at last and came to live here, for I like well to be alone. She picked up her root basket and led the way to the door. And here I am still. The stories in the moment of closeness were over, at least for today. Reluctantly, Saskia followed old Bess out the door, remembered the rune she had seen on it when she came, and turned back quickly. The marks were still there, fading and shimmering by turns. She touched old Bess's arm and pointed to them. I have one now? Old Bess peered hard at the wood, but shook her head. I cannot see it. Saskia drew it in the dirt of the pathway with her toe. What does it mean, child? Do you know? It means keep away, Saskia told her with a little grin. Old Bess smiled and gave her brief, rare laugh. So am safe from mischief, am I? For a time, anyway. Whose mischief? Saskia wondered, as they started together along the street. Who makes the marks? Why do I know them? Some of them, and what do they mean? And what they mean. She had no idea of the answer, but the questions themselves had roused in her the familiar restlessness, the confused feelings of yearning and loss that had plagued her since she could remember. The only cure was the pipes, and playing them long and loud. When they reached the blacksmith's cottage, she skipped in, leaving old Bess to press on with her quest for roots and mushrooms. With luck, Anwara was up in the low field and tending the hens, but Anwara was there, a hank of brown fleece on her shoulder, fingers busy with drop spindle as she paced from hearth to cupboard and back again. A new-spun skein lay on the table, half hiding the little bunch of red and white daisies still slightly drooping in their mug. Saskia eyed the flowers, dissatisfied. She would have had to do better. You have been long with my mother, Anwara remarked with a penetrating look. If you went there, indeed. I did. She showed me her books. Showed you her books? Anwara's voice was astonished. Her fingers missed their catch, and the spindle fell dangling and twirling, unwinding the arm's length of the thread she had just wound on it. Saskia pounced, captured it, and returned it. Absently, Anwara wound up the thread again, her surprised gaze still on Saskia. Well and all, I'm sure she never showed me any of them. The spindle began its smooth down and up motion, and her fingers their rhythmic dance as she added, Not that I ever plagued her to look at them great dusty bundles. Whatever would I think to see? Maybe, thought Saskia, that is why she never showed you them. Yet she herself had not plagued or even asked, just looked and wished, and old Bess had known it. Perhaps old Bess knew everything in the world, except not all the runes. Anwara resumed her spinning walk. When her back was turned, Saskia tugged the old trundle bed from under her cot and snatched out the bagpipes. I'll fetch the cow now, Mamma, she sang out, already halfway to the door. Now, it's not time yet. But Saskia was gone. Anwara caught her spindle and came to the doorway. The sun was but halfway down toward the great shoulder of the hills. Angrily she called Saskia back to gather her eggs and scrub the hearth. By then Saskia was nowhere to be seen. Aware of amused glances from neighboring doorways, nobody else's children could disappear so fast. Anwara clamped her vexation between her teeth and turned back into the house. A moment later, Saskia slithered down the far side of an apple tree hitched the pipes to her shoulder, and hurried on up the path toward the wasteland and the moor beyond. Forbidden or not, she was going straight there. Maybe if she did not tell anybody, nobody would ask, or really care how far she strayed, except Anwara. Anwara always asked. But perhaps she would lie to Anwara, or just not answer. It no longer mattered. She had to go back to the moor. She could no longer stay away from the only place she had ever felt she belonged. Oops. That's the end of part 2, but I feel like maybe I should take a rest now for a little while and come back to it later. I did want to read it all the way through, but I'm already feeling like the roof of my mouth is itching, which makes me think I'm having some sort of like it could be like a referred thing from reading so much, or it could be allergies, but I feel like I should stop for a little bit and rest my voice. Thank you for listening. I'll read more later. We're nearly halfway through, almost halfway through. I'll read more later. Goodbye for now.